But he was no longer facing the submissive, broken slave from Tal Valley. Thomas stood firm, the musket's muzzle locked onto Einar's distorted face, his finger resting on the trigger. Boom! A deafening shot rang out. A cloud of orange flame and smoke erupted as Einar's charge was halted by an invisible force. Einar froze, his expression caught between rage and shock, as he looked down at the dark, spreading stain on his chest before meeting Thomas's eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a wheezing, hollow rattle emerged. The battlefield echoed with fading gunfire, the air thick with smoke, blood, and the stench of decay. Thomas stood frozen, his posture still locked in the act of firing, like a statue weathered by time. His gaze fixed on Einar's corpse, the man who had once dictated his life and embodied his every fear, now lying in a twisted, pathetic heap in the bloody mud. Blood seeped from beneath the body, staining the earth and melting snow. It was over. The figure that had haunted his nightmares and fueled his hatred was finally gone. A single lead bullet, one shot, one life ended, simple and absolute. Yet, the expected relief never came. Instead, a profound, disorienting emptiness washed over me, drowning my senses. The burning hatred that had sustained me since the Tal Valley, through endless cold and hunger, had suddenly lost its purpose with Einar's death. Like a machine drained of fuel, I stood aimlessly, unsure of my next move. Surrender? To whom? I wore the rags of a sullen soldier, my hands stained with the blood of both enemies and former comrades. Would the Carnford people accept a mysterious sullen straggler? Would they believe I had just killed a sullen officer? Or would they simply execute me as another enemy? Flee. To where? Sullen was finished, my home destroyed. I was a rootless drifter regardless of where I ran. I looked down at the flintlock in my hand. The barrel was still warm, but the ammunition was spent. I scanned the corpse-strewn field. The distant sounds of battle felt muffled and unreal, as if separated by a thick pane of glass. A sudden surge of combat nearby snapped me out of my stupor. Across the sea of fleeing men, a group of Solon soldiers was attempting to regroup, clashing fiercely with the advancing Carnford vanguard. Gron, commander of the Dog Legion, clawed his way up from a pile of bodies. His helmet was gone, his armor dented, and one arm hung uselessly at his side. He surveyed the apocalyptic scene, panicked soldiers fleeing like sheep, abandoning weapons and banners. The center of the Solon army had completely collapsed. A wave of despair crushed him. Sven was dead, bled out in the ruins of Village No. 2. Asgir was dead, overwhelmed by the Franklin army's counterattack at Village No. 5. Ulf was dead, having paid for his earlier failures back in the Tal Valley. Ivar was dead, cut down by Carnford cavalry. King Harold was likely lost too, having charged into the Carnford steel tide with his personal guards, never to be seen again. Dominic, the cunning Skarn, had likely fled with his horse legion to seek safety elsewhere. He was the last commander left of the Solon Corps. He refused to accept it. Gron clenched his fist, his nails digging into his palm, the physical pain grounding his inner agony. He could not accept the collapse of the legacy his ancestors had bled for, nor the meaningless deaths of his brothers in arms. He had to fight one last time, not to win, but to prove that Solon warriors were not mere cattle to be slaughtered. A desperate, fiery resolve ignited in his eyes as he drew his scimitar. With a beast-like roar, he cut down two fleeing soldiers who passed him, indifferent to the blood splashing his face. "Stop," he bellowed, blocking the path of the retreating mob with his bloodied blade. "Don't run. Stand your ground." The soldiers halted, intimidated by his ferocity and the dripping weapon. Gron shouted with every ounce of his strength. "King Harold has charged with the White Wolf Guard. He has opened a path. Do not betray his sacrifice." His voice, hoarse and frantic, carried a desperate conviction. One more charge. They are exhausted. If we push now, victory is still ours. He glared at them, brandishing his scimitar. Anyone who runs dies by my hand. Follow me. For Solon. For the king. Driven by his threats and the glimmer of hope regarding the king's charge, the broken soldiers began to waver. They stopped running, gripped their weapons, and a faint light returned to their eyes. 100-strong force miraculously coalesced around Gron. Thomas watched from afar as the blood-soaked commander used violence, lies, and manipulation to forge a new fighting force from the wreckage. He saw the soldiers, who had moments ago been fleeing for their lives, now gripping their weapons with renewed, murderous intent. A cold, sharp rage replaced my previous emptiness. I could not let them regroup. I could not allow these butchers another chance to kill. I had finally seen them defeated, and I would not let them rise again. Whether I was a Solon deserter or a Plantagenet survivor didn't matter. I knew what I had to do. Kill them. Kill every last one of them. I was a Plantagenet, and these Solonians had slaughtered my people. I was done hiding. It was time to fight. Thomas resolved to fight like a true Plantagenet, determined to help the Carnford people annihilate these butchers. This was his final conviction. Discarding his empty flintlock, he knelt by Einar's cold corpse and retrieved a bloodstained sword. The hilt felt heavy and icy in his grip. He looked up at Gron and his regrouped unit, then shouted with unwavering resolve, "The Carnford army is here. Harold is dead." Waving his sword, he charged headlong toward the Solon formation, screaming at the top of his lungs. His shout struck the Solon soldiers like a thunderclap, shattering their fragile morale. "The Emperor is dead," they panicked. But Gron said he charged. "It's the Carnford army. They've caught up." Thomas's sudden appearance, his blood-soaked, battle-worn attire, and his ferocious charge sowed absolute chaos and terror. The Solon soldiers, already teetering on the edge of collapse, saw their last illusions of hope vanish. "Run! The Emperor is dead. We've been lied to." Their defensive line disintegrated completely. Soldiers ignored all commands, desperate only to flee the slaughterhouse. Gron, furious, cut down 2 deserters and roared, "Don't retreat. It's a trick. Stand your ground." His threats were useless. Soldiers shoved past him or ignored him entirely, fleeing in every direction as his voice was drowned out by the panic. Watching his last forces vanish like sand through his fingers, Gron realized it was over. Solon was finished. His gaze locked onto the source of the chaos, a ragged figure approaching him with a sword. It wasn't a Carnford soldier. Gron squinted. The man wore the uniform of a Solon musketeer. A traitor. Why? Gron trembled with rage and confusion. Solon kept you fed and alive. Why betray us for the Carnford people? Thomas stopped, his calm, steady gaze a sharp contrast to Gron's fury. "I am a Plantagenet," Thomas replied clearly. "Killing Solonians is my birthright." The simple statement struck Gron like a dagger. A Plantagenet, the slave they had treated like livestock, the wretch who had survived the Tal Valley, had never truly submitted. Consumed by a sense of betrayal, Gron roared, "You ungrateful dog! Die!" He lunged at Thomas like a furious lion, his scimitar raised. Thomas did not retreat, meeting Gron's charge head-on. Their weapons clashed with the weight of mutual hatred. Clang! The metallic screech echoed across the battlefield, drowning out the distant gunfire. Despite his exhaustion, Gron fought with the vicious, seasoned skill of a Legion commander, his scimitar striking at Thomas's vitals. Thomas lacked finesse, relying on raw, suicidal ferocity. He fought without defense, seeking only to trade his life for Gron's. Clang! Clang! They stumbled over corpses and discarded weapons, their footing treacherous in the blood-slicked mud. Gron fainted, then twisted his wrist to slash Thomas's left arm. Rip! Blood sprayed as the blade bit deep. Thomas staggered, nearly falling. Gron pressed the attack, his scimitar a storm of steel. Thomas struggled to parry, his defenses crumbling. Thwack! A slash to the thigh brought Thomas to one knee, blood pouring from the wound. This is the price of betrayal. Gron raised his scimitar for the killing blow. In that moment of vulnerability, Thomas threw his sword with his remaining strength, aiming for Gron's chest. Gron, caught off guard, couldn't dodge in time. Squelch! The blade pierced Gron's armor and sank into his chest. He gasped, staring down at the hilt in disbelief. Thomas sprang up, pulling a hidden dagger from a nearby corpse, and lunged like a starving wolf. Gron, though dying, roared and swung his scimitar in a desperate horizontal arc. Thwack! The blade tore through Thomas's abdomen, spilling blood and viscera. Ignoring the agony, Thomas slammed into Gron and drove the dagger into the side of his neck. Squelch! Hot blood sprayed over Thomas's face as they collapsed together, rolling into the mud. Gron lay pinned beneath Thomas, his life draining away from his neck and chest wounds. Thomas, suffering a mortal wound to his gut, clung to consciousness, his hands locked around Gron's throat. Choking, Gron twisted the scimitar still embedded in Thomas's stomach. Ugh! The twist of the hilt caused agonizing, gut-wrenching pain. Thomas let out a harrowing scream, his body arching before collapsing. His grip on Gron's throat slackened, his strength drained by the torment. Gron's chest wound tore open further, blood gushing out. Between the sword's trauma and his crushed windpipe, his life force bled away like a broken dam. His vision darkened, and his limbs grew cold and numb. He slumped to the side, coming to rest face to face with Thomas in a bizarre, intimate final gaze. Amidst the carnage, the sounds of battle faded into a dull roar. On this blood-soaked, corpse-strewn ruin, only these two dying men remained. Both gasped for air, blood bubbling from their throats. Their bodies twitched in agony, faces twisted, yet their eyes remained locked on one another. Gron's eyes burned with hatred, confusion, and the hollow bewilderment of the dying. He slowly raised a blood-stained hand, trembling as he pointed at Thomas, desperate to curse the traitor who had shattered his final hope. A rattling, wheezing sound escaped his throat. He couldn't form words. Only his fading eyes continued to burn with unquenchable malice. Thomas watched Gron's hateful face with unfocused eyes. The pain had faded into numbness. His abdomen was shredded, his blood nearly spent. His end was near. He mustered his final strength to offer a bloody, weary, yet serene smile of relief. Coughing up blood, he turned his head away from Gron's fading visage toward the sky. The leaden, overcast sky seemed to mourn the battlefield, yet a sliver of light pierced the clouds, illuminating his dimming vision. In that light, he saw his late wife, who had died in childbirth, smiling warmly. Beside her was the shadow of his unborn child. As his blood drained, his body felt weightless. The distant sounds of Carnford muskets and dying horses faded into a peaceful release. He moved his cracked lips, whispering to himself, "I am a Plantagenet. I killed a Solonian." His voice vanished into the cold air. The light left Gron's eyes, and his pointing hand fell limply into the mud. Two men of opposing fates had ended their lives in a mutual demise. Around them lay the battlefield, the charging Carnford soldiers, and the heavy silence of a dying era. Thomas lay still, a strange, peaceful smile on his face. He had found his revenge and his homecoming. He was no hero, just a man struggling in chaos. But in his final moment, he reclaimed his identity and dignity. Ahead, a silver torrent of steel surged forward like an avalanche. Harold's White Wolf elite cavalry, the last pride of Solon in their silver-inlaid armor, unleashed their final, desperate energy. Like a storm, they slammed into the pursuing Carnford skirmishers. The earth shook under the thundering hooves, rattling the very hearts of the infantry. The cavalry plowed through the ranks, crushing Carnford musketeers and retreating Solonians alike. Screams and the clash of metal erupted along their path. Peter, blood-drenched and battle-crazed, watched his comrades fall and was consumed by uncontrollable rage. He howled like a beast, leveling his reloaded flintlock to charge headlong into the cavalry tide. "Get back here, you damn fool!" A powerful arm grabbed Peter, yanking him back from his suicidal charge. It was Weber. The squad leader, though bloodied, remained sharp and pulled Peter to safety. "What good does dying do? You want to be horse manure?" Weber roared, his voice raspy. "That's not how you die." In those few seconds, the cavalry charge swept past. They scattered the vanguard of the Carnford troops, but the impact left Peter and Weber's unit fragmented. As the tide passed, only 5 or 6 soldiers remained around them. "Gather, back to back, bayonets out." Weber barked, his veteran instincts taking over as he pulled the scattered men together. The dazed soldiers rallied to Weber, leveling their muskets. A small, makeshift circular formation, a hedgehog, formed amidst the corpses, bayonets bristling outward. The Solon cavalry, seeing the bristling wall of steel, reined in their mounts. The horses, sensing the danger of the bayonet forest, refused to charge. The cavalry circled, looking for a gap, but Weber's men rotated the formation to keep the bayonets pointed at them. "Hold steady. They won't charge," Weber shouted. "We fire in turns. Suppress them." Under Weber's command, The circle functioned like a machine, with some guarding while others aimed. Peter locked eyes on a Solonian rider preparing to throw a javelin, aiming for the horse's flank. Bang! The shot rang out. The horse shrieked and collapsed, throwing its rider into the dirt. Good shot, someone cheered. Peter ignored them, his hands moving with practiced, numb efficiency, biting the cartridge, priming the pan, and closing the touch hole. He poured the powder and lead down the barrel, ramming it home with the ramrod. His movements were fluid, his mind devoid of fear, replaced by a cold, focused drive for vengeance. The White Wolf cavalry had broken the vanguard, but they failed to disrupt the rear as Harold hoped, for the Carnford reinforcements were already surging forward. The 6th Battalion stepped into the gap left by the 7th, forming a perfect line and unleashing a synchronized, point-blank volley at the slowing cavalry. Boom! A deafening volley of flintlock fire erupted, sending white smoke billowing. The White Wolf elite cavalry, having just breached the 7th Battalion's skirmish line, were met with a brutal, point-blank barrage. The lead riders slammed into an invisible wall, men and horses collapsing in screams. The momentum of the charge was shattered instantly. Peter reloaded his weapon with practiced, rhythmic precision, his fingers trembling slightly from exhaustion. A young, fresh-faced soldier suddenly pointed ahead, his voice shrill with excitement. Look, it's Harold's banner. The White Wolf. He's fleeing. Kill the barbarian. Capture Harold. The boy's cry acted like a stone cast into a still pond, igniting a wildfire of desperate longing among the weary troops. Peter snapped his head up, following the boy's gesture. Trailing the Solon cavalry currently overrunning the rear, a sinister black banner bearing a wolf's head surged past, surrounded by guards in white armor. It was the White Wolf Royal Banner, the symbol of the Solon king who had terrorized the Northern Territory for decades. This was the ultimate prize of the war. Harold's head meant not just personal glory and promotion, but the definitive seal of victory. Young soldiers craved glory. The younger men, desperate to change their fates through valor, felt their eyes turn bloodshot with greed. The fluttering wolf banner became a beacon, drawing the gaze of every soldier on the field. Capture Harold. Don't let him escape. Charge. Discipline and formation dissolved. The soldiers, previously holding a defensive circle under Weber, broke ranks and surged forward like a tidal wave in pursuit. The battlefield descended into chaotic, fanatical pursuit. Weber cursed furiously, knowing light infantry chasing cavalry without a formation was suicide. The boys were throwing their lives away for glory. His shouts were swallowed by the roar of the frenzied mob. Harold, Peter whispered, his eyes locked onto the distant, flickering wolf banner. Memories of Hans falling and the tales of Solonian atrocities fueled a burning resolve. I need that medal. I'll avenge Hans. He grabbed his rifle and sprinted after the others. Peter, get back here. Weber roared in fury. Peter shouted back over his shoulder, breathless and resolute. I'm avenging Hans. If I die, tell my mother I wasn't a coward. He vanished into the sea of soldiers chasing the banner. Weber stomped the ground, cursing the suicidal brat. He turned to his remaining men, who stared back with the same burning, reckless hunger. Captain, let's charge. We're all that's left. We die together. Weber looked at the 7 or 8 men left, all sharing that same desperate fire. He spat blood and cursed. A bunch of lunatics. Fine, I'm crazy too. He gripped his saber. Luke, stay here, guard the wounded, and wait for the rear guard. Everyone else. He pointed his blade toward the vanishing banner, roaring, follow me. Capture Harold alive. Aura. The remaining soldiers let out a war cry and plunged into the chaotic, fanatical flood. The wind howled like a blade, tearing all sound into shreds. Harold hunched over his horse, galloping amidst the tide of his White Wolf elite cavalry. The battlefield blurred into streaks of smoke and gore, but his mind drifted to the past. He recalled his youth, riding alongside his father. Back then, Solon's iron hooves crushed the Northern Territory, and the Plantagenet border troops were mere lambs for the slaughter. Solonians were invincible wolves. Even in defeat, they always retreated to the deep grasslands to lick their wounds and return stronger. War was simple then. In his delirium, Harold felt he wasn't retreating, but charging. He was still the undefeated White Wolf King, leading his elite to shatter the enemy's weakest point. Victory felt within reach. If he could just drag these pursuers along, he might buy time for his broken army to reach the forests of Frostguard, where he could rise again. His dream was shattered by a thunderous roar. Boom! A wall of white smoke and orange flame erupted ahead, the disciplined, organized volley of the Carnford infantry. Harold's heart sank. These were his White Wolf guards, the elite of the elite, not mere conscripts or slaves. Could they break this line? He wondered, feeling a sudden, cold uncertainty. Once, Plantagenet infantry were just targets for his cavalry, their lines as fragile as paper. But everything had changed. He had never imagined infantry could be this resilient, holding formation under fire, reloading with cold efficiency, and forming a forest of bayonets that terrified even the bravest riders. Before he could process the thought, boom, boom, two more thunderous volleys roared, and a storm of lead bullets swept through their ranks. Harold watched as the White Wolf elite cavalry's silver-crested helmets were mowed down like wheat by a scythe. Their ornate white armor shattered under the lead bullets, and the knights fell into the bloody mud before they could even scream. The cavalry formation collapsed instantly under 3 volleys. Horses reared in terror, throwing riders or spinning aimlessly. The momentum of their charge was utterly obliterated by the devastating firepower. A roar erupted as Carnford infantry and dragoons surged forward like tigers. They exploited the chaos, using bayonets and pistols to slaughter the stalled, disorganized cavalry. A flank attack proved fatal. Hundreds of Carnford cavalry charged like ghosts, slicing through the White Wolf elite's scattered ranks and cutting the once mighty unit in half. Under the combined assault of infantry, dragoons, and cavalry, the White Wolf elite lost all cohesion, trapped in a desperate, fragmented struggle. Surrounded by over 2,000 Carnford soldiers, the elite unit was like a giant trapped in a swamp, struggling in vain as they were slowly consumed. "Charge! Follow me!" Harold roared, waving his saber, desperate to rally his men for a final stand or a breakout. His voice was instantly swallowed by the deafening cacophony of screams, clashing steel, and musket fire. As he shouted, a few personal guards fought their way to his side. Leading them was his captain, a scarred, loyal veteran of a decade. Blood-streaked and armor riddled with holes, his eyes burned with desperate resolve. "Your Majesty, we must go. The Carnford cavalry is closing in," the captain shouted, grabbing the bridle of Harold's horse. "Let go. I will fight them." Harold raged, struggling to charge. He refused to accept defeat or the fate of a fleeing cur. The captain ignored him, yanking the horse's head toward the north. "Your Majesty, as long as you live, there is hope." The guards surrounded Harold, shielding him as they broke toward the north. The Black Wolf banner, once a symbol of power, now acted as a beacon for death, drawing the gaze and fire of every Carnford soldier. "Drop the flag, or give it to someone else," the captain ordered. The standard-bearer reluctantly handed the royal banner to a common guard and vanished into the crowd to avoid notice. While some pursuers were distracted by the redirected banner, a massive force of Carnford soldiers continued to hunt them like sharks scenting blood. Harold sat dazed on his horse, letting his guards drag him northward. His mind was blank, his will shattered by the earlier volleys. He swayed mechanically with the horse's gait, a puppet stripped of its soul. As they fled, a sharp, rhythmic volley of musketry rang out from the west. Bang! Bang, bang, bang. 7 or 8 Carnford soldiers intercepted them, raising their muskets and firing point-blank at the sullen cavalry. Puff, puff, puff. Guards fell, screaming. The captain took a grazing shot to the shoulder, blood staining his armor. He reined in his horse, casting a grief-stricken look at his fallen brothers before hardening his resolve. He roared at Harold, "Your Majesty, go. I will hold them." Drawing his scimitar, he shouted to the remaining dozen guards, "Brothers, with me. Protect the king." Without hesitation, he led the last of the guards in a suicidal charge against the Carnford soldiers. Harold instinctively pulled his horse to a halt, looking back. He watched the captain's back and the guards charging headlong into death. Then, his gaze drifted past them to the western plains, and his blood turned to ice. A sea of blue, countless Carnford soldiers, was surging toward him, an endless, overwhelming tide of uniforms and gleaming bayonets under the dim sky. They ran, cheered, and fired, all focused on one target, the King of the North. Harold stared at the blue wave, the twisted faces of his enemies, and the forest of black muzzles pointed his way. He knew he was finished. Frostguard was lost. His era had ended. A wave of absolute despair drowned him. He slowly released the reins. His sword, his companion for years, clattered into the mud. I followed the fanatical youth soldiers across the corpse-strewn battlefield. The ground was slick with blood, the air thick with smoke and the stench of death, filled with the roar of battle and the screech of metal. I gasped for air, my lungs burning and my legs heavy as lead. Though slower than the younger soldiers, I pushed on, clutching my reloaded flintlock for comfort. Ahead, the 6th Battalion plugged the gap left by the White Wolf Elite. Conford dragoons and infantry swarmed the sullen white-armored cavalry, dissolving the elite unit like snow under a summer sun. I didn't care for common soldiers. I sought the royal banner. A medal from that victory would be enough to make my mother and sister proud. Suddenly, a commotion erupted ahead. A dozen sullen cavalrymen burst from a smoke-filled hollow, attempting to break out. The youth soldiers fired a volley, dropping several, but a few broke through, swinging sabers at the boys. The young soldiers, fearless, lunged with bayonets, stabbing the horses and throwing the riders into the chaotic fray. Amid the confusion, I spotted a few riders breaking north. My eyes locked onto them. In the center was a man in exquisite, gilded armor that shimmered like twilight, standing out sharply against the common white-armored guards. My heart hammered. Instructor Tommy had taught them how to identify rank. That craftsmanship, that color, and the way he was shielded, it had to be a high-ranking commander, or perhaps Harold. The name struck me like lightning. A surge of excitement and hatred flooded my exhausted body, granting me new strength. I stopped, finding a stable position. I took a deep breath, forced myself to be calm, and leveled my flintlock. I pulled the hammer back with a crisp, metallic click. Peter locked his sights on the rider in gilded armor. Though the target bounced as the horse galloped, it remained a viable shot for a trained soldier. He ignored the rider, aiming instead for the horse. "Kill the barbarian," he roared. Peter unleashed a primal scream, pouring all his exhaustion and hatred into the action before pulling the trigger. Bang! The flintlock roared, spitting fire and smoke. Peter stood firm against the recoil, eyes tracking the lead bullet. The bullet spiraled through the air, striking the galloping warhorse with a sharp crack. The horse let out a piercing shriek. Its front legs buckled, and the massive beast collapsed, rolling into the mud. The armored rider was flung through the air, landing heavily in a pool of blood and mud. "Mark, I'm avenging you." Peter roared like a wounded beast, his body surging with a desperate, fiery energy. Gripping his bayonet rifle, he sprinted toward the fallen rider, the battlefield blurring into a chaotic smear of color and gore. As Peter arrived, the armored figure was already staggering to his feet. Harold, the Wolf King of the Northern Territory, possessed immense physical resilience. Despite the fall, he immediately stabilized his stance, ready for combat. He squinted, spotting the blue-clad Carnford soldier charging at him like a mad tiger. Harold felt no fear, only a surge of predatory instinct. He drew his ornate scimitar, its blade glinting coldly, and stepped forward to meet Peter's bayonet. Clang! The weapons collided, showering sparks. The shockwave numbed Peter's arm and split his thumb webbing, but he gritted his teeth and lunged again, his bayonet striking like a viper. Harold laughed maniacally, his voice cutting through the din of battle. "Excellent. To think I'd end up fighting a mere grunt. Show me what Carnford soldiers are made of." They clashed in the mud. Peter fought with raw, vengeful fury, though his textbook bayonet technique proved clumsy against Harold's seasoned, lethal experience. Harold's style was vicious and unpredictable, his blade dancing between Peter's guard to target his throat or abdomen. Squelch! A slash opened a deep gash on Peter's left arm, staining his uniform red, but the pain only fueled his hatred. Abandoning defense, Peter stepped into the reach of the blade, putting his entire weight and rage behind a desperate thrust toward Harold's chest. Harold, surprised by the boy's suicidal ferocity, parried the bayonet at the last second. The The force of the impact sent Peter skidding backward, his boots carving deep furrows into the mud. Die! Peter lunged again, catching Harold's leg and drawing blood. Harold retaliated instantly, his scimitar carving a deep, blinding gash across Peter's face. Peter cried out, stumbling back. Harold followed up with a horizontal sweep, shredding Peter's leather armor and tearing into his chest. Peter collapsed, his rifle flying from his grip. Harold stepped forward, pinning Peter to the ground with a heavy boot. He leaned down, pressing the blood-slicked scimitar against Peter's carotid artery. Looking down at the blood-drenched soldier, Harold sneered. "Do you even know who you're fighting, boy? You should be honored," he declared with cold arrogance. "You stand before the supreme king of Solon, Harold." Despite the agony and blood obscuring his vision, Peter's eyes burned with undying hatred for the man who had caused so much suffering. It was him, the name that haunted the North. Peter thought of his murdered father, his mother and sister in Carnford, and his brother at the shipyard. He thought of Mark, his comrade who had fallen just steps from victory. He thought of the slaughtered border villagers. I cannot die here. Not by this butcher's hand. I haven't avenged Mark. I haven't gone home. I won't die alone. As Harold prepared to slit his throat, Peter erupted into motion. He grabbed the razor-sharp blade of the scimitar with his bare hand, ignoring the blood as the steel sliced into his palm. Harold was stunned by the soldier's insane tenacity and failed to pull the blade free. In that moment of hesitation, Peter reached out and grabbed Harold's wounded leg, heaving with all his might. Harold lost his balance and crashed to the ground. The scimitar flew away, and the two men began a desperate, primal brawl in the mud. Fists, elbows, knees, teeth, and nails, every part of their bodies became a weapon. The two men rolled in the bloody mud, grappling and tearing at each other with lethal intent. The roar of the battlefield, the gunfire, and the screams of the dying faded into a distant, muffled blur. On this small, blood-soaked patch of earth, only two remained. A young soldier fueled by vengeance and the once mighty Wolf King of the Northern Territory. Harold, exhausted by long battles and travel, began to falter. Peter, driven by a desperate, suicidal rage, seized the upper hand. Peter pinned Harold down, straddling his waist. With bloodied, broken knuckles, he rained blows down upon Harold's majestic, now bruised and terrified face. "This is for Mark," Peter roared, shattering Harold's eye socket. "This is for every northerner you slaughtered." Bang! Another strike crushed Harold's nose, spraying blood and snapping bone. "For my father. For Amina. For Daniel." Peter's punches tore flesh and loosened teeth with every name he screamed. A final, heavy hook to the jaw snapped Harold's head to the side. Peter, a mask of blood and tears, continued his mechanical, rhythmic assault, chanting the names of his dead like a prayer of vengeance. Each name represented a blood debt. Each punch was a brutal settlement of that account. Harold initially struggled, his limbs flailing as he tried to throw off the crazed soldier. But Peter's blows were relentless, a storm that refused to cease. Harold's resistance withered, his vision blurred, and the world turned into a swirling, crimson haze. He saw the stern face of his father and the ghosts of his fallen comrades. Sven, Esgir, Ulf, they watched as his empire crumbled like a sandcastle. "It's all my fault," was his final, clear thought before slipping into eternal darkness. Peter stopped only when his arms felt like lead. Harold's face was a pulped, unrecognizable ruin, his shallow, blood-flecked breaths the only sign of life. Exhausted, Peter collapsed backward, falling off Harold and lying flat on the freezing, muddy ground. The two men lay side by side, staring up at the smoke-choked, gray sky through a haze of blood. Harold's eyes slowly, finally, closed. The Wolf King of the Northern Territory, after a life of glory, died in the mud, slain by an ordinary Carnford soldier. It was an undignified end for a king, but a fitting death for a warrior. Nearby White Wolf elite cavalrymen saw their king fall and the blue-clad soldier standing over him. As more Carnford soldiers rushed in, the guards hesitated. Realizing all was lost, the guards turned their horses and fled north, abandoning the field. Peter, are you still alive?" A familiar voice pulled Peter from his stupor. He forced his blood-crusted eyes open to see Weber, his squad leader, shaking him. Weber looked at Peter, then at the body in the gilded armor. His breath hitched in shock. Grabbing Peter's collar, Weber shouted, his voice cracking with excitement. Peter, you've earned your medal. Look at this armor. This is Harold himself. You killed him. Go, tell Battalion Commander Roderick. Peter did this alone. Peter, lying on the cold ground, managed a weak, toothless, blood-stained smile of satisfaction. He tried to speak, but exhaustion overwhelmed him. His vision faded, and he drifted into unconsciousness. Medic, over here. We have a casualty. Weber bellowed. Peter was loaded onto a stretcher. As it jolted along, he forced his eyes open just a crack. Above him, the sky had cleared, revealing a brilliant, piercing blue. Warm sunlight filtered through the clouds, touching his face. I killed Harold. I have my medal. Mom, sister, I'm not a coward. He closed his eyes again, a genuine, peaceful smile on his lips. Scattered fighting continued across the battlefield as remnants of the Solon forces made futile, desperate stands. But the outcome was decided. Harold's body was wrapped in a flag and rushed to the forward command post as the most valuable trophy of the war. Officers and soldiers gathered around the gilded corpse, staring with a mix of awe, curiosity, and disbelief. Leon arrived and dismounted, kneeling to inspect the exquisite, blood-stained armor. He traced the intricate engravings and gems, his brow furrowed. This craftsmanship is extraordinary, Leon remarked. This belongs to a Legion commander at least. But who? Sven? Esgir? Or the missing Dominic? Having never seen the Solon King in person, Leon remained cautious, despite his suspicions. Bring me a prisoner. An officer, a wolf legionnaire. Leon commanded. Guards dragged over a trembling, bloodied Solon soldier. Upon seeing the gilded armor, the soldier collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably as his faith shattered. Irritated by the display, Leon kicked the prisoner and barked, "Stop crying. Identify this man. Is this your Legion commander? Speak." A Solon soldier wept uncontrollably, pointing at the corpse. "It's the king. His Majesty is dead." Leon stood stunned, struck by the news. He stared in disbelief at the body and the sobbing captive, unable to process the reality. He grabbed a higher-ranking Solon officer wearing white personal guard armor. Recognizing the futility of denial, the officer collapsed upon seeing the familiar armor. "It is King Harold. Woe is us." The Solon soldiers mourned their king and their nation's fate. After a moment of shock, Leon threw his head back and roared with triumphant, relieved laughter. "Ha ha! Excellent. Harold, your time has finally come." Realizing their greatest enemy, the tyrant who ruled the Northern Territory for decades, had been slain by their own comrade, the Carnford soldiers erupted. "Victory! Long live Carnford! Long live Ott!" Ecstatic cheers and shouts of victory exploded around the command post as soldiers celebrated. Leon turned to Weber, his eyes bright with joy. "Did you kill Harold?" Weber waved his hands frantically. "No, sir. It was my sergeant, Peter. He beat that barbarian to death with his bayonet and bare fists. I found him sitting on Harold, smashing his face in." Leon recalled the name. "Peter? The one who killed a Solon regiment commander in Tyrol." Weber nodded proudly. "The same. He's fierce and hard-working, if a bit impulsive. He's done us a great service." Leon chuckled. "That brat has incredible luck. From sergeant to Kingslayer. He'll be outranking me soon." Medics passed by with a stretcher. Weber pointed. "That's him, sir. That's Peter." Leon approached the stretcher, looking at Peter's bloodied, swollen face. "Medic, is he going to survive?" The lead medic saluted. "He has several wounds, but none are fatal. His face is badly beaten, but he will recover." Relieved, Leon patted Peter's shoulder. "Scars are medals of honor, lad. You fought the king of Solon and won. A story for the ages." He declared solemnly, "I'm recommending you for the first-class Spruce Medal. You're a hero of the realm." Peter's eyes lit up through the bandages. He tried to laugh, but winced in pain. "First class Spruce Medal." He was carried away, laughing and crying like a fool. Leon watched him go, his expression shifting back to that of a stern cavalry commander. The battle wasn't over. The retreating Solon remnants had to be crushed to prevent future threats. He ordered his staff, "Dragoons, mount up. Advance north. 2nd Guard Battalion and 2nd Cavalry Regiment, keep the pressure on the center. Cut off their retreat. The staff officer saluted and rushed to relay the orders. Leon mounted his horse immediately, followed by his officers. The staff officer paused, confused. "Sir, aren't you staying to command?" Leon grinned. "The battle is won. You handle the paperwork. I'm going to hunt down the rest." He spurred his horse forward. "Charge!" Leon and his officers galloped toward the smoke-filled north, chasing the fleeing enemy. The remaining staff officers laughed, realizing the opportunity for glory. "Let's go. Don't let them take all the credit." They spurred their horses to join the pursuit. The joy of victory fueled the Carnford soldiers' relentless advance. With the last Solon reserve destroyed and their Wolfhead banner vanished, the Carnford left flank was unleashed. The infantry and cavalry surged like a blue tide, relentlessly hammering the crumbling Solon center. Each strike shattered the Solon lines further. The 2nd Guard Battalion appeared behind the Solon lines, crushing their last hope of regrouping. Under Otto's 4th Battalion, the Solon rear collapsed like a broken dam. Officers' shouts and the commissary's threats were useless against the panicked rout. The last organized defense disintegrated into a chaotic sea of fleeing soldiers. Across the fields of Frostguard, thousands of Solon soldiers fled north, pursued by the iron grip of Carnford. The Solon soldiers abandoned their weapons, banners, and everything hindering their flight, desperate to escape. "Cavalry, follow me." Cut off their retreat. Leon's bloodthirsty roar echoed across the battlefield. Leading the Carnford cavalry like a steel torrent, he struck the Solonians' path of retreat, effectively sealing their escape route. Simultaneously, the Carnford infantry battalions maneuvered westward, forming a moving steel wall that pressed in from the east and south. Trapped, the Solonians surged toward the only perceived gap, the vast, frozen North Sea. The collapse triggered an unstoppable, chaotic avalanche of misery. Desperate to survive, Solon soldiers trampled one another. Cavalry cut down infantry blocking their path, while infantry used spears and bayonets to strike at riders, abandoning all camaraderie. Ironically, many Solonians died not by Carnford blades, but at the hands of the slave soldiers they had once oppressed. Seeing the Solon defeat, the slaves seized their chance for vengeance. They killed their former masters, stole their horses and weapons, and joined the chaos of flight or retaliation. The wilderness was littered with corpses. The air reeked of blood and despair, staining the grass and snow crimson. With the northern route blocked, 10,000 Solon cavalry were trapped within the surging infantry, unable to maneuver. Forced by the tide of the rout, they abandoned their northern breakout attempt and were swept westward. The flood of fugitives reached the edge of the frozen North Sea, finding their path blocked by the vast, icy expanse. Hesitant to step onto the ice, the front line was pushed forward by the massive, panicked crowd behind them. Once the first group stepped onto the ice, the rest followed, fleeing northward along the coastline. The Carnford cavalry continued their pursuit, launching wave after wave of charges into the disorganized Solonians. Countless soldiers were trampled under the hooves of the cavalry, their screams lost in the thunder of the charge. The Carnford infantry systematically drove the scattered fugitives back toward the sea. A deafening, desperate shriek rose from the sea of Solonians. All thoughts of resistance vanished. They only sought the narrow path across the ice. Many cavalrymen slipped on the slick ice, falling to be trampled or buried by the relentless human tide. Dragoons arrived at the battlefield edge, hauling 4-pounder and 8-pounder cannons. Artillerymen quickly set up their positions, grinning as they loaded the cannons with lethal canister shot. The fleeing Solonians passed directly before the cannons. Too terrified to stop or fight, they could only run, hoping to outpace death. Leon stood behind the dragoon line, his armor caked in dried blood, his eyes gleaming with the cold, ecstatic thrill of slaughter. He waited until the ice was packed with Solonians before raising his blood-stained saber. With a sharp downward swing, he commanded, "Fire!" The dragoons and artillery erupted in a thunderous roar, unleashing a storm of lead and iron upon the dense crowd. Like a scythe through grass, the Solonians fell in rows. Blood mist filled the air, turning the white ice into a hellish, dark red. The gunners worked with mechanical, feverish intensity, reloading and firing without pause. Piles of corpses blocked the path, forcing survivors to turn back, only to be crushed in the resulting bottleneck. Conford infantry advanced onto the ice, using bayonets and point-blank fire to finish the trapped soldiers. The weight of the panicked crowd caused the ice to crack and collapse. Soldiers were plunged into the freezing North Sea, their desperate cries for help ignored in the carnage. The frigid water claimed them quickly, leaving the shoreline littered with pale, floating corpses. Those who escaped the ice and returned to the wilderness collapsed from pure exhaustion. With no strength left to fight, the remaining Solonians were hunted down like game by the Conford cavalry. Some knelt to beg for mercy, while others sat in the snow, hollow-eyed, awaiting their end. The last of the Solonians were cut down outside the gates of Frostgard, which remained firmly shut. From the walls, the remaining Solon garrison watched in horror as their once mighty army was erased. They realized that the era of Solon had come to a definitive end. The setting sun cast a tragic, golden-red glow over the blood-soaked battlefield. The North Sea wind wailed, singing a final dirge for the fallen empire. The deafening roar of battle faded into an unsettling, heavy silence, leaving only the wind to howl across the blood-soaked plains. Thin wisps of smoke drifted over the battlefield like lingering ghosts. The snow-covered field was a gruesome tapestry of black scorched earth and dark, congealed blood. Tens of thousands of Solon soldiers lay in twisted heaps, their individual lives reduced to cold, silent statistics. Riderless horses wandered the field, neighing in a futile search for their fallen masters. I stood on the command platform, my blue cloak snapping in the wind as I surveyed the carnage with complex emotions. I felt a flicker of excitement. I had defeated my most formidable enemy yet. From a minor lord to a rival of herald, I had finally crushed the core of the empire that once terrorized the land. The journey had been arduous. Countless sacrifices and desperate struggles had led to this victory, yet the triumph felt strangely hollow. The heavy cost of the victory left no room for simple celebration. The shoreline was choked with broken armor, discarded weapons, and bodies, the ice stained a vivid, shocking red. Defeated Solon soldiers were being herded like cattle by Conford troops. The once feared army that had ravaged the northern territory was utterly destroyed. Brendan approached, breathless and tearful, clutching a report with a mix of exhaustion and relief. "My lord, it's confirmed, Harold is dead. Our sergeant, Peter, killed him in single combat during the pursuit. Esgir, Ivar, and Gron are confirmed dead. Dominic of the Horse Legion has surrendered, begging to serve as your slave." I scoffed at the mention of Dominic. "I have no use for such a turncoat. Lock him up for later." Brendan reported that of the 40,000 Solon troops, only a fraction escaped under Sven. The rest were dead, captured, or drowned. "The Solon main force is finished." The veteran choked back a sob, looking at me with red-rimmed eyes. "My lord, the Northern Territory is finally liberated." I gripped Brendan's shoulder. "This is the glory of every Carnford soldier and citizen, not just mine. Order the infantry to clear the field and tend the wounded. The 1st and 2nd Cavalry will regroup. By sunset, I want the spruce banner flying before Frostgard. Prepare to siege." Brendan saluted sharply and strode off to relay the orders. I looked toward a captured hill where a massive, new spruce banner snapped in the wind, a solemn symbol of our success. Soldiers below spotted the blue flag and paused their work, gazing up at the emblem of their victory. A weary but thunderous cry erupted. "Victory!" The cheer spread like wildfire across the field. "We won! Long live Carnford!" Caps were tossed into the air as soldiers embraced, wept, and shouted, their collective relief echoing across the plains. I clenched my fists, eyes fixed on the distant, closed gates of Frostgard. The hardest part was over, but the final battle remained. Carnford troops busied themselves clearing the field, burying their own, identifying enemy commanders, and securing spoils. Officers gathered near the spot where Gron, commander of the Dog Legion, had fallen. He clearly fought a desperate battle. One remarked, noting the claw marks and blood. "Whoever killed a Solon commander deserves a massive reward." It was chaos out there. We'll likely never know which soldier dealt the final blow. They were unaware that the man who killed Gron lay nearby. Thomas lay on the cold snow, his expression peaceful, a faint smile gracing his lips. He looked as though he were merely resting after a long day, lost in a pleasant dream. To the Carnford soldiers, he was just another anonymous, blood-stained sullen corpse. A young Carnford soldier, tasked with clearing the field and collecting trophies, approached the body. He glanced down at the sullen soldier. The body was stiff, the strange, serene smile unnoticed amidst the surrounding horrors of the battlefield. The soldier raised his hand axe with practiced indifference. Crack! The sound of bone breaking was sharp, but instantly swallowed by the noise of the camp. Thomas's head was tossed into a collection basket without a second glance. The basket was filled with faces twisted in rage, pain, and terror. Among them, Thomas's head stood out, still wearing that serene, liberated smile, untouched by the world's hatred. He was no longer a slave from Tal Valley, a terrified deserter, or a vengeful warrior. He was simply Thomas, a Plantagenet who had found his peace after avenging his family. My story may never reach history books or be known by the powerful, but amidst the blood-soaked earth and mountains of corpses, I found my own redemption and eternal peace. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the silent battlefield. In the distance, the banners of Carnford fluttered amidst cheers of victory. September 10th, outside Twin Rivers City. The Fran City Army camp was shrouded in a night as thick as ink, marking over a month of stalemate. Twin Rivers City, a fortress controlling the North-South Passage, consisted of two castles linked by a massive drawbridge over the shimmering river. Inside his tent, Governor Rockefort paced restlessly, brow furrowed, clutching a dying pipe. Ignoring the suffocating smoke, he stared at the map, his gaze shifting between Twin Rivers City and the Frostguard region to the north. He had besieged the fortress for over a month. The city's unique layout, two castles connected by a drawbridge, allowed the garrison to shift forces and resupply freely, rendering a partial siege ineffective. Rockefort's attempts at a direct assault had failed, resulting only in heavy casualties. He wasn't overly concerned. His goal was merely to pin the garrison down, preventing them from reinforcing Harold's main force. The true battle was in Frostguard with me. Everything now hinged on me. Rockefort relit his pipe, the bitter smoke failing to soothe his mounting anxiety. He had received no word from the north. Victory would mean lasting peace for the Northern Territory. Even defeat wouldn't be fatal. Harold's forces were exhausted and nearing their end. They could always retreat and return in the spring. His only true worry was me. Rockefort had watched his son-in-law, me, grow up. I was brilliant and brave, a natural leader, but possessed a fatal flaw. I was far too reckless. My penchant for high-stakes gambles had created miracles, but it kept Rockefort in constant dread. He feared I would overreach in Frostguard, risking everything for a total victory. If I fell, Rockefort couldn't bear to think of his daughter Charlotte, who had finally found happiness with me. Nor could he fathom the future of Carnford or the North, with the royal capital's vultures circling for power. As Rockefort paced, a shout rang out. Report. A dust-covered messenger galloped up, dismounted frantically, and burst into the tent. Governor. Urgent report from Lord Carl. A great victory in the North. The messenger's voice was hoarse, but his words struck Rockefort like thunder. Speak. Rockefort demanded, his eyes fixed on the man. We won. Lord Carl annihilated the main Solon Legion outside Frostguard. Harold is dead. Commanders Isgir, Ivar, and Gron are all slain. A total victory. The messenger beamed with pride. Rockefort's pipe clattered to the floor. Stunned, he finally asked, Is it true? Is Harold dead? Absolutely, Governor. This is Sir Brendan's official report. Rockefort snatched the warm, sweat-stained letter and scanned it. The report confirmed the messenger's account of the Battle of Frostguard. Yet, his eyes darted across the page, searching for one specific name. He grabbed the messenger's collar, voice trembling. What about Carl? Is he injured? Is he safe? The messenger quickly replied. Sir Brendan confirms Lord Carl is unharmed and doing well. Rockefort let out a long, relieved sigh. He released the messenger, gripping the report until his knuckles turned white, and looked toward the night sky, exhaling his weeks of dread. Thank the gods, he murmured, his voice heavy with exhaustion but lightened by relief. It's finally over. He turned to his officers. Find an officer under Leon. Show him this report. Tell him his Solan masters are dead. Ask him if there's any point in holding this isolated city now. Meanwhile, in the southern castle, the garrison commander Leon also remained awake. He paced his study, ignoring the maps and reports, consumed by unease. Cut off from the north since the siege began, he had only received vague rumors from scouts. He knew a decisive battle was occurring, but he was trapped, a passive observer of his own fate. He realized his struggle was merely a distraction that couldn't alter the main front. Even if he held the city, if Harold lost, his resistance would be meaningless, and his death inevitable. Lord Harold, you must win. He prayed, though he knew the prayer was futile. He shook his head to clear the dark thoughts. A knock sounded at the door. Enter, Leon said, masking his anxiety with a stern, composed expression. An officer entered with a strange, complex expression, holding a letter. He saluted Leon. My lord, Rockefort has sent a letter. Leon waved him off irritably. I said no surrender letters. Anyone bringing such things will be beheaded. Do you want to die? The officer flinched but insisted. My lord, I truly believe you must read this. Sensing dread, Leon frowned and took the letter. The message was brief. As Leon read, his pupils dilated and his face turned deathly pale. His hands began to tremble uncontrollably. Harold is defeated, killed in battle. Asgir, Ivar, Gron, all dead. The Solan army, completely annihilated. Each word struck like a hammer. His mind went blank, his ears rang, and the world seemed to collapse. The paper slipped from his limp fingers to the floor. He stood frozen, like a soulless statue. Harold was gone. The defeat was total, the leader was dead. Was there any point in holding out? He bent down stiffly to reread the report, hoping for a mistake. But the clear wording and the official France City seal confirmed the nightmare. A cold tide of despair drowned him. He knew that in this war, turncoats, especially leaders like him, were hated more than the enemy. Even if Harold had been captured, I might have spared him. But Leon, who betrayed the Plantagenets for Solan, would never be forgiven. His hands were stained with Plantagenet blood. I would never let him live. Should he die for a fallen dynasty, or surrender to Rockefort and beg for mercy that likely didn't exist? Leon stared at the twin river under the moonlight, lost in despair. He knew his fate was sealed the moment Harold fell in the north. On September 11th, the Carnford vanguard reached the outskirts of Sea City, the heart of the Solan-occupied northern territory. This fertile land had been home to Solan elites, their herdsmen, and serfs for over a decade. But when news of the Solan army's total destruction at Flossgard arrived, everything changed. Fear spread like a plague. The Solonians knew the crimes they had committed. The slaughter, looting, and enslavement were etched into the memories of the northern people. With their military shield gone, they awaited the inevitable revenge of Carnford. They knew no mercy would be shown. They would have done the same in their position. Instinctively, a mass exodus began. The plains were flooded with refugees, some on crude carts, others on horseback, most on foot, struggling through the freezing cold. They fled toward the desolate, harsh lands of their origin, their only remaining sanctuary. The journey was brutal. Deep autumn winds bit into them, and food shortages became lethal. Humanity rotted under the pressure of survival. People killed each other for scraps or warm clothing, leaving corpses to be buried by the snow. The collapse of the Solan Empire manifested as a total breakdown of order and morality. On September 12th, the Carnford main cavalry force reached the city of Flossgard. The former Solan capital was in apocalyptic panic. Rumors of the Carnford army's approach fueled the chaos. Tales of total slaughter and impending doom spread like wildfire, inciting mass hysteria. The city fell into anarchy. Looting was rampant, and corpses lay ignored in the streets. Thousands of residents, both Solonian and enslaved, fled blindly northward, turning the city into a ghost town within days. In the trash lord's hall, Sven sat alone. His eyes were bloodshot, his face gray, as if he had aged 20 years. His armor was still caked with dried blood and mud from the battlefield. His bear legion had been trapped in the village, locked in brutal combat with Carnford forces. He had watched the Solan army collapse and seen Harold's wolf banner vanish into the blue sea of Carnford soldiers. Only his personal guards had dragged him from that hell. Only 1,000 broken men escaped with him, scattering upon reaching Sea City. Soldiers ignored their officers, grabbing supplies and fleeing to their home villages to warn their families. By the time Sven reached Flossgard, only 300 remained. Eventually, only a dozen loyal guards stayed by his side. The palace was in total disarray. Slaves and commoners were stripping the palace of everything: furniture, utensils, and even copper ornaments. The Solon regime had relied solely on heralds' personal strength and high-pressure enslavement, held together by stolen wealth. It lacked any true internal cohesion. Once the military power vanished, no one remained loyal to the regime that had oppressed them for years. Sven refused to surrender. He would die in the city his father and brother had seized. He croaked, "Fenhern, take the guards, gather the troops. Tell them we still have a chance if we hold Flossgard. Let them take whatever they want from the palace. I am a butcher. I won't spare us." No one answered. Sven turned his head slowly. The hall was empty. The guards and attendants were gone, the rooms ransacked. Even his last loyalists had slipped away. He was truly alone. On September 15th, the Carnford 1st and 2nd Cavalry Legions arrived at the gates of Flossgard. The dark blue banners snapped in the cold wind as the battle-hardened army stood in triumph before the Solon capital. I arrived, gazing at the silent, soulless city with its closed gates and tattered flags. Beside me, Leon stood in silence, his eyes complex as he looked upon his ancestral home, lost to Solon over a decade ago. I understood the weight of Leon's gaze. I patted Leon's shoulder warmly. "You've been away for years. This victory honors your family. Take the 1st Cavalry Regiment, secure the area, and restore order. I trust you." Leon bowed slightly, grateful yet firm. "Thank you, my lord. But the fight isn't over. There is one final battle to win." I nodded in silence. I dismissed the defense of Flossgard as Sven's futile struggle. Leon's final battle was the reclamation of his home. I, however, looked toward the royal capital in the south, where political rivals waited. Duke Schmidt, my nominal father, approached with a steady gait. The Duke's expression was a mix of pride, relief, and unspoken guilt. The Duke stopped beside me, both watching the silent city. Leon tactfully withdrew to give them space. I remained silent, my feelings toward the Duke complex. As a transmigrator, I felt no deep emotional bond with the Duke and had never sought to bridge the gap. Yet, having become a father himself, I began to grasp the nature of parental expectations and the friction caused by clashing ideals. My own near fall from grace and subsequent return to the fold gave me new perspective on the Duke's past actions. After a long silence, the Duke spoke, his voice aged, peaceful, and honest. "My son," the Duke said, eyes on the city, "you are braver and more capable than I ever imagined. You've achieved what I dared not dream." He paused, then turned to me with sincere regret. "I must apologize for sending you to the Northern Territory. I am sorry." An apology from father to son was rare in this rigid, patriarchal society. This simple admission signaled the Duke's surrender of pride and his genuine recognition of me. Seeing the sincerity in the Duke's eyes, the last of my resentment melted. "It is nothing, father," I replied gently. I looked toward the vast Northern Territory. The frost of the north, it tempered me. The brief exchange carried more weight than any grand declaration. Past grievances were swept away by the wind. They remained father and son, with the North serving as both the site of my exile and the foundation of my greatness. They stood together as the spruce banner of Cranford flew high above. At dawn, as light hit the walls of Flossgard, the Cranford artillery prepared for the final strike. I watched from a nearby hill, my expression calm. I hoped to end this without further loss of life. With victory assured, I chose to crush the Solonians' remaining will with overwhelming steel and fire. "Fire!" I commanded, and the artillery line erupted. Cannons lined the southern hills, aimed at the ancient city. Men and cannons fired rapidly, hailing shells upon the ramparts to clear the defenders. Falconets provided precision fire, targeting every suspected defensive position. The 9-pound elephant cannons roared, their heavy iron balls shattering stone and shaking the very foundations of the walls. Most terrifying were the large-caliber mortars. Like iron beasts, They lobbed heavy stone projectiles high into the air. The stones fell with a terrifying whistle, crushing roofs and streets, pulverizing those who thought they were safe behind the walls. Flosgard trembled under the bombardment. Smoke and dust choked the sky. The morale of Sven's mercenary-heavy garrison shattered instantly. Soldiers abandoned their posts, fleeing into basements and corners to cower in fear. Elmont, standing by a massive mortar, grinned at the artillery captain. "Let me take this shot." The captain stepped aside. Elmont took a breath, ignited the fuse, and covered his ears. The fuse hissed, followed by a thunderous boom. The ground shook as the mortar recoiled, sending a stone projectile in a high arc toward the city. Crash! A large building, likely a barracks, collapsed under the impact, burying the Solon archers stationed atop it. Elmont laughed, watching the smoke rise. "Magnificent. It's a shame Hector isn't here to see this masterpiece." He turned to his men, shouting, "Keep firing. Lord Karl's orders. Don't leave a single shell. Crush those Solon dogs." The artillerymen cheered, redoubling their efforts as the bombardment turned the city into a hellscape of steel and fire. Hours of relentless shelling finally brought the decisive result. Flosgard's southern wall groaned under relentless heavy artillery fire, its masonry fracturing into spiderweb cracks as stone and earth crumbled away. A precise 9-pounder shot finally struck home, causing a massive, deafening section of the wall to collapse inward. Dust billowed as debris formed a passable ramp. The wall was breached. Conford infantry, bayonets fixed on their flintlocks, marched in disciplined ranks over the ruins and into Flosgard. The expected urban warfare never materialized. The wall's collapse had shattered the defenders' remaining resolve. Organized resistance vanished. Solon soldiers, terrified by the bombardment, either discarded their weapons to hide among civilians or cowered in the ruins. Conford's advance was eerily smooth. They traversed empty streets and corpse-strewn intersections, turning the former Solon capital into a defenseless ghost town. The vanguard soon reached the Lord's Hall, the once mighty symbol of Solon power in the Northern Territory, now battered and silent. Sven remained inside, fruitlessly hoping to mount a final stand within the sturdy stone structure. I, however, denied him that opportunity. Upon learning of Sven's position, I issued a cold order. "Bring up the heavy artillery and level it." Artillerymen hauled several elephant 9-pounders and a mortar to the square, aiming their muzzles directly at the hall. "Fire!" The cannons roared in unison. Iron and stone projectiles hammered the hall's thick walls. With each successive impact, the structure's integrity failed. With a thunderous crash, the front wall collapsed inward, followed by the roof. Sven and his remaining guards were buried beneath the falling stone and timber. Sven, Solon's last pillar after Harold, died not in glorious combat, but crushed beneath the ruins of the hall he vowed to defend. His stubborn loyalty and despair vanished into the dust of history. On September 16th, Flosgard was liberated. The dark blue Conford spruce banner rose over the smoking ruins of the Lord's Hall. The flag symbolized the North's unyielding will, the victory after 15 years of waiting, and the end of a humiliating era. News spread, sparking nationwide celebration as the Northern people, long oppressed, flooded the streets in tears of joy. On September 20th, news arrived from Twin Rivers City. Leon, the garrison commander, refused to surrender despite Sven's death. Count Rockefort gave him no quarter. Conford reinforcements arrived, and the Fran City army launched a total assault. Twin Rivers City fell, and Leon was slain by Count Rockefort himself, ending the last organized Solon force. After 15 years, the North was finally liberated. The blood-soaked land returned to its true masters, allowing the survivors to finally honor those who died for this victory. The new Lord's Manor in Conford was situated in a serene area of the inner city, lacking the cold, damp, fortress-like atmosphere of the old castle. Designed with open spaces and floor-to-ceiling windows, the manor invited warm sunlight to dispel the late autumn chill. Despite the winter, the garden's holly and late chrysanthemums provided life, while chirping sparrows added a sense of peace to the residents. Charlotte had abandoned the old castle. Its cold, damp stone walls and echoing, drafty corridors were unsuitable for long-term living. As a mother and expectant woman, she moved to the new manor with little Klein once construction finished. With fireplaces, soft blankets, and warm floors for Klein to crawl on, it finally felt like a true home. Charlotte sat at her desk, quill in hand, staring at a thick ledger. Her brow was furrowed. The hand that once wielded a sword now struggled with the pen, reflecting the frustration of a warrior forced into an unfamiliar field. She refused to be a mere housewife. She was a former knight and my comrade in arms. Memories of archery and the thrill of the charge remained vivid, yet now she sat in silence, overwhelmed by columns of numbers. Upon returning to Conford, she had asked me for duties, and I had tasked Edgar with finding her a role. Edgar, after careful consideration, assigned her to audit the accounts of the state-run shops. He deemed the work safe, non-sensitive, and a good use of her intellect, provided she could master the bookkeeping. For Charlotte, however, this was a daunting challenge. She was a master of the battlefield, capable of hitting moving targets from 30 paces and maintaining calm amidst chaos. But accounting was a different world. The dense numbers and complex commercial terminology left her dizzy. She sighed, rubbing her temples as the sunlight reflecting off the ink seemed to mock her struggle. She recalled learning to ride. She had fallen many times, but never gave up, eventually becoming an expert rider. Determined, she gritted her teeth and began checking the records line by line. She whispered the numbers, trying to grasp the logic behind them. The ledger used a precise system. Flour, 300 bags, 2.5 silver coins each, 750 silver coins receivable. Salted fish, 200 barrels, 1.8 coins each, 360 receivable. Wool, 100 bolts, 12 coins each, 1,200 receivable. Farm tools, 50 sets, 15 coins each, 750 receivable. Every transaction was clear: quantity, unit price, and total amount, with corresponding cash entries marked as settled. Payments for flour, fish, and tools were marked as settled, while a deposit for cloth was noted with the balance pending. The ledger was perfectly balanced and meticulously kept, leaving Charlotte with no errors to find, despite her best efforts. Charlotte stared at the ledger, frustrated that the accounts were so flawlessly organized that she, a layman, could find no fault. She recognized this as the double-entry bookkeeping I had once described. Originating from distant southern city-states, this method was favored by shrewd merchants and bankers, requiring significant literacy and mathematical skill. By assigning every transaction a source and destination, I had implemented this system in Carnford to ensure transparency and efficiency. Charlotte smiled. I managed my territory with the same meticulous precision I applied to military campaigns. She recalled me sitting by candlelight, using a quill to sketch charts on parchment as I patiently explained the relationship between debits and credits. Back then, she had barely understood the mechanics, distracted by my confident, composed expression. Now, she deeply regretted not paying closer attention. As the sun set, casting long shadows across her desk, Charlotte's mind drifted to the north. I had been gone for a long time, and the last messenger had arrived days ago, leaving her anxious. Despite her faith in my military genius, the battlefield was unpredictable. She feared the stray arrows and unseen dangers that claimed even the greatest commanders. These thoughts made her heart tighten and her breath hitch. She knew from personal experience how quickly a life could end in war. She touched her stomach. Since returning to Carnford, her life had stabilized, and the toned muscles of her past as a knight had softened. Her abdomen was now rounded, not with fat, but with new life. It was a strange sensation. When she was pregnant with little Klein, her relationship with me was fraught with tension and royal interference, leaving no room for joy. Now, in a secure environment, she could finally embrace the changes in her body. She often rested her hand on her belly, feeling a profound tenderness for the growing life within. I had told her I loved this version of her, finding her mature, gentle beauty captivating. My gaze had been as warm as a spring lake, making her feel like the happiest woman alive, though she still felt a lingering sense of loss. The fierce female knight who once charged into battle seemed gone, replaced by a softer, rounder reflection in the mirror. She was now a wife worried for her husband's safety and a mother dedicated to her child. She spent her nights listening for messengers, her meals wondering if I was fed, and her days touching my clothes, longing for my return. A few days ago, the doctor had confirmed her pregnancy. Lying on her bed, she had watched the elderly doctor smile, her heart a complex mix of emotions. She hoped for a girl to complement little Klein, completing their family. She imagined braiding her daughter's hair and teaching her to weave, while also training her in archery so she could be both elegant and formidable. Her reverie was broken by a sound. A soft, tentative knock echoed at the study door. Charlotte steadied herself and asked, "Who is it?" A small, milky voice replied, "Mommy, open." It was little Klein. Charlotte's face lit up as she hurried to open the door, eager to greet her toddler. Klein stood there in a warm, beige padded jacket that made his skin look porcelain white. He looked up at her with bright, starry eyes, having clearly struggled to navigate the distance from his room to hers. A young maid stood nearby, smiling and ready to catch him if he stumbled. Seeing his mother, Klein reached up with both hands, babbling, "Mommy, hold." Charlotte's heart melted instantly at the sight of her son. She bent down to scoop him up, noting how heavy he had become. She kissed his cheek, inhaling his faint milky scent, and felt a surge of pure happiness. Klein clung to her collar, burying his head in her shoulder. "Mommy, where's Daddy?" Charlotte's heart trembled. She patted his back gently, whispering, "Daddy will be home soon. He's busy defeating the bad guys, and then he'll come back to play with you." Klein nodded, nuzzling into her neck for comfort. His warm breath against her skin grounded her. She realized this was the essence of motherhood, providing a warm embrace and steady promises when they were needed most. Suddenly, a faint cheer erupted from outside. Charlotte initially ignored it, assuming it was the usual bustle of the busy city. But the cheers grew louder and more infectious, swelling into a roar of excitement that swept through the streets. The sound reached the manor's courtyard, with voices shouting, "Long live the Lord!" and "Victory!" Charlotte's heart leaped. She dared to guess the cause. Her hands trembled as she held Klein, her pulse racing with an overwhelming, breathless anticipation. She hurried toward the manor entrance, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. The maid ran ahead, returning moments later with a dust-covered, blood-stained messenger. Both were beaming with an irrepressible, radiant joy. "My lady! My lady!" the maid shrieked in excitement. "Great news! A glorious victory!" Charlotte took a deep breath, clutching Klein tightly to steady her shaking hands. "Tell me, what happened?" A messenger knelt, gasping out the news. Lord Karl had annihilated the Solon army outside Frostgard. Harold was dead, the Northern Territory was liberated, and both I and Count Rockefort were unharmed. Each word struck Charlotte like a thunderclap. The Solon army destroyed, Harold dead, the North free, and her loved ones safe. The sheer volume of good news left her stunned. She stood frozen, clutching Klein, as the words echoed in her mind. Then, hot tears began to stream down her cheeks. These were tears of relief, joy, and pride. The days of anxiety, sleepless nights, and silent prayers finally culminated in this emotional release. She recalled my departure, my armor gleaming in the morning light as I promised to return. She remembered the trembling hands that opened every letter and the prayers whispered before sleep. Now, it was all over. Everything was well. Seeing his mother cry, little Klein clumsily wiped her face with his warm, soft hands, asking anxiously, "Mommy, why are you crying?" "Don't cry." Roused by her son, Charlotte pressed her face against his, overwhelmed with gratitude. Choked with emotion, she whispered, "I'm just happy, Klein. Daddy won. He defeated the bad guys and is coming home." She hugged him tightly, and Klein, sensing her joy, giggled and patted her shoulder. Sunlight bathed the courtyard, warming the embracing mother and son. The distant clock tower rang out, signaling victory as the city erupted in cheers and tears of joy. All of Carnford was in celebration. Looking at the clear sky and a beautiful rainbow, Charlotte touched her abdomen, smiling at the thought of my reaction when I returned. She planned to rush into my arms and tell me she had mastered double-entry bookkeeping. She would tell me that Klein could walk and was already asking after his father. She would express her pride in me, not just as a wife, but as a comrade in arms. As the sun warmed them, Charlotte closed her eyes, savoring the peace. Deep within the royal palace at Play City, The Empress Dowager slumped into her chair, a letter slipping from her hand to the floor. Outside, autumn winds swirled. The report confirmed her worst fear. I had achieved a total victory, not the mutual exhaustion she had hoped for. The Solan army was wiped out, Harold was dead, and the North was liberated. My army remained largely intact, ready to march south after a brief rest. The Empress Dowager tapped her chair rhythmically, her eyes flashing with malice. She could wait no longer. Her plan to let me and Harold destroy each other had failed. She had underestimated me, as I had turned the impossible into reality while preserving my military strength. If I integrated the North's resources, I would become unstoppable. Within years, my power would eclipse hers entirely. She had to strike first. With cold resolve, she issued a command. An attendant stepped forward. Order Count Eisenberg and Commander Victor to march on Kraft Castle immediately. Destroy Roland's forces before I can move south. Be swift and ruthless, she added. I want the royal flag flying over Kraft Castle before I can react. The attendant left, leaving the Empress Dowager to watch the gathering storm clouds. The sky mirrored the day she and Victor conspired to eliminate King Heinrich XI. That day had been just as gloomy. In Frostgard, I showed no immediate signs of marching south. I knew the Empress Dowager would act, but I prioritized stabilizing my new territory. Solan's decade of rule had left the North in ruins, with collapsed governance, poverty, and rampant banditry. Without a secure rear, a southern campaign would be reckless. I dispatched Leon and the 1st Cavalry Regiment to clear out remaining Solan stragglers and bandits. Leon's familiarity with the region made him the perfect choice to restore order. I also ordered Edgar to send administrators and literate personnel from Carnford to rebuild the local government. I needed to establish a functional administration to truly claim the North. More importantly, I had a promise to keep. I had vowed that the Northern recruits would return home to land and tax exemptions. This promise had fueled their loyalty during the war, and now it was time to fulfill it. This would prove that I was a man of my word, ensuring the people's trust. The announcement of land distribution and tax relief caused a sensation. Skeptical locals began to shift their allegiance. People supported whoever could provide food, land, and security. I understood this perfectly, and I was in no rush to confront the Empress Dowager. I knew my military strength surpassed the Empress Dowager's. After the Northern Territory Wars, my army's experience, equipment, and morale were at their peak, while the Empress Dowager's forces had long lacked combat practice. However, the nature of this war was different. Defensive wars for one's land and family naturally inspire high morale and clear purpose. Civil wars, especially those aimed at regime change, carry a completely different meaning for soldiers. Soldiers may feel confused or resistant, risking instability or mutiny if the transition is mishandled. I needed time to reshape their loyalty, shifting their identity from abstract Plantagenets to Carnford people. I had to convince them that fighting for Carnford's interests was fighting for their own, ensuring safer land, greater wealth, and better futures for their descendants. This subtle process couldn't be rushed. Fortunately, my recent victory gave me the prestige, capital, and patience to win this psychological and public opinion war. Autumn sunlight warmed the vast Northern Territory plains. Leon halted his horse before his ancestral castle, reclaimed after a decade of Solonian occupation. Leaves swirled across the stone path before the fortress. Removing his helmet, Leon revealed a face aged by years of war, yet his posture remained as rigid and sharp as the castle itself. The castle had been the private residence of Gron, a brutal Solonian legion commander who had desecrated the site. Gron had burned or discarded the family's history, banners, ancestral armor, and his mother's favorite tapestries. It was said Gron even roasted a whole cow in the Great Hall, staining the family crest with grease. Though Gron was dead and the Solonian traces removed, the humiliation remained. Leon touched the deep gouges in the stone steps, scars left by Solonian boots and spurs, reflecting the castle's past suffering. He entered the Great Hall, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The vaulted ceiling's murals of ancestral battles had been whitewashed into oblivion. Leon looked up at his father's portrait, which had been rehung. The man in the painting wore old armor with a stern, unyielding gaze. It was one of the few relics saved before the retreat to France City. A scorched mark marred the corner, left by a drunken Gran attempting to burn it. A loyal butler had saved the painting at the cost of being whipped and imprisoned until the Solonians fled. Leon had sent the butler to Frostguard for treatment and intended to thank him personally. Leon stood before the portrait in silence. He recalled his father's final night in the cold, damp winter of France City, his body withered and eyes sunken. Yet, his father had gripped Leon's hand with surprising strength, whispering, "Leon, you must return. You must." Those were his father's last words before his hand, which had guarded the border for a lifetime, went limp. Leon remembered weeping by the bed while his mother stood silently behind him as snow buried the world outside. Raised on his father's regrets and his mother's tears, Leon grew up with the heavy promise of returning. He knew his life was destined for this reclamation. He remembered his mother staring at the northern stars, longing for the home and family left behind. He had joined Lord Karl's then obscure forces with his personal guards. Back then, I was just a minor border lord whom no one expected to achieve anything. Leon had only sought a chance to die in battle, fulfilling his father's wish, never expecting to actually reclaim his home. He had never imagined he would truly return. Standing in his ancestral hall, he felt a complex mix of emotions. With the Solonian items gone, the castle's soul had returned, even if many furnishings were new. Leon sat in his father's favorite oak chair. The polished armrests felt like a connection to his father's daily life, as if he could still hear his voice or see him cleaning his sword by candlelight. He stood, donning his battle-worn helmet once more. He couldn't linger. Lord Karl's mission to clear the remaining bandits and Solonian stragglers was unfinished. With one last look at the portrait, he strode out. Outside, his weary but proud guards waited. Leon drew his saber, shouting, "Move out! I want every Solonian with a blade gone from the north before winter." The cavalry rode off to continue their campaign. On the main road, long lines of migrants moved north, pushing carts filled with pots, bedding, and tools. Others rode ox carts, the elderly resting and children laughing, while many walked with hopeful faces. These were landless peasants, bankrupt artisans, and displaced northern natives returning home. Organized by the Department of Civil Affairs, they traveled with guides, guards, and supply stations, ensuring an orderly journey. Carnford's terms were incredibly generous. Every migrant received land, with the government providing seeds, cattle, and grain for the initial reclamation. Taxes were minimal, a symbolic amount for the first 3 years, far better than the crushing rents of the South. Refugees traveled north toward Frostguard, filled with hope. Along the road, Carnford established supply stations providing hot food and medical care. The massive procession remained orderly, with parents vigilantly keeping their children close. Upon reaching Frostguard, the migrants did not linger. Settlement Bureau officials soon arrived to guide them toward the fertile northern black soil, where they would establish new homes. The fields buzzed with activity as settlers built wooden cabins, cleared brush, and plowed land for winter crops. Children's laughter echoed across the fields, signaling a rebirth for land long ravaged by war. A middle-aged man worked on a cabin with his family. Skilled with tools, he quickly framed the house while his wife assisted and their children gathered firewood, the man humming a hearty tune. A passerby asked where he hailed from. Wiping sweat, the man smiled. "I came from the south, where I toiled for nothing. Here, the soil is rich and black. I expect a bountiful harvest next spring." His eyes shone with hope. Meanwhile, Weber, now a captain, returned to his birthplace with Mia and their daughter. Dressed in his crisp officer's uniform with his service saber at his side, he walked the familiar village road. Mia listened as Weber recounted childhood memories of climbing pines, catching fish in the creek, and eating ice from the old well. Yet, standing there, Weber felt a strange sense of detachment. The village remained, but the people he knew, his friends and elders, were gone. Most had been killed by Solonians. The few survivors had scattered. The current residents were all newcomers. Though the villagers treated them with warm hospitality, Weber felt a void. The deep, intimate connection to his roots was missing. He found only a stump where the pine stood and a dried-up creek bed. Mia's experience was identical. She had returned to her northern territory home hoping to find kin lost during the war. She learned the same truth. Her family had vanished during the conflict. Standing before her ruined home, she wept as Weber silently comforted her. That evening, the couple sat on a farmhouse threshold, watching a beautiful but somber sunset. Mia spoke firmly. "Weber, let's go back to Carnford." Weber turned to her face pale but her gaze steady. Mia continued, "We have our jobs, our home, and our community there. This place is our past, but our life is in Carnford." Weber nodded, holding their sleeping daughter. "Agreed. We returned to Carnford." Mia asked softly, "Is your fighting finally over? Please, no more dangerous missions." Weber smiled with newfound peace. "The Solonians are defeated, the North is reclaimed. Our daughter will grow up in a peaceful world," he added with a grin. "And she'd better not marry a soldier." Mia laughed, playfully hitting him. "Exactly. I don't want her living in constant fear for her husband's life." They laughed together, relieved and ready to return to their real home in Carnford the next day. I did not stay long in Flossgard, disliking the lingering, oppressive atmosphere of the Solonian occupation. I found the city's architecture gaudy and unsettling, preferring the practical, clean design of Carnford, where I had built my legacy. I favored Carnford's cheerful, hopeful people over the fearful, numb residents of Flossgard. Before departing, however, I held a grand military parade. Carnford's troops filled the parade grounds, their blue uniforms and bayonets gleaming in the autumn sun. With horses neighing and banners flying, the soldiers stood like statues in an impressive display of strength. Northern citizens, long oppressed, wept openly at the sight of the army that had finally liberated them. Though I was not of royal blood, to these people, I was the king who restored their lives. An elderly man stood in the crowd, leaning on his cane. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered, "They've returned." He had survived years of solitude solely to witness the day the invaders were finally driven out. After the parade, I entrusted the Northern Territory's defense to Leon, appointing him commander of the Flossgard military district. Leon was tasked with reorganizing the local garrison, training troops, and clearing out remaining Solon forces. Civil administration was handed to a group of young officials trained by Edgar's department. Having studied the Carnford system and laws for years, they were ready for their first major assignment. I then led the bulk of my army back toward Carnford. Looking back at the receding city of Flossgard, I pondered my next move. The north was pacified, but the shadow of the south loomed large. I knew the real challenge was ahead, but I remained patient and confident in my plan to bring the entire Plantagenet kingdom under my control. At dawn, a caravan of grain wagons departed the royal capital of Play, heading southeast through the morning mist. The mist was thick, obscuring the city. The gate guards, shivering in the cold, lazily poked a few grain bags with spears before waving the caravan through. The caravan appeared mundane, with sleepy drivers and creaking wheels. The guards, yawning and chatting, paid no mind to the unremarkable group, which was indistinguishable from dozens of others passing through the gates daily. Beneath the grain bags lay hidden caches of steel swords, battle axes, and heavy maces, all gleaming with cold intent. There were also bundles of arrows and pungent, oilcloth-wrapped gunpowder, a discovery that would have caused a massive scandal. This caravan was a supply line for the Empress Dowager. Count Eisenberg and his aide Victor were leading an elite force toward Roland's position at Cliff Fort. The force consisted of seasoned veterans traveling by night along hidden paths to maintain absolute secrecy. It was a rare, successfully executed secret operation for the royal capital. The Empress Dowager had issued strict orders. Absolute silence was mandatory. She viewed this as her final chance to catch Roland off guard and remove one of my most capable generals before my main force arrived, dealing a blow to Carnford's morale. She knew she could no longer win in a direct confrontation. The Carnford army's performance in the north had far exceeded her expectations. Her pampered royal troops stood no chance against them in open field combat. A surprise attack on Cliff Fort to kill Roland was her only hope to establish a defensive barrier and buy time. Among the guards was a man in worn leather armor, his face weathered and his sword scratched, a typical mercenary. Yet, he led an extra horse, its tack perfectly adjusted for a quick mount, revealing a level of preparation far beyond a common guard. This guard was Franz. While posing as a mercenary, he was actually a key operative for the Carnford Intelligence Bureau. Richter had assigned him to infiltrate the capital to monitor the Empress Dowager, keeping him away from the Northern Front. It took 2 months of careful maneuvering to establish a network in the capital, where spies were everywhere. Franz had worked in a tavern to gather rumors before securing a position with a royal supplier, leveraging his horsemanship and weapon knowledge. The Empress Dowager believed her plan was flawless, unaware that every move was under the surveillance of the Carnford Intelligence Bureau. Franz had spent months gathering intelligence, even obtaining a partial copy of the Empress Dowager's attack plan. By infiltrating this supply caravan, he confirmed the location of Count Eisenberg's troops and verified the presence of the hidden weapons and gunpowder. This intelligence was invaluable. As the caravan moved, Franz approached the leader, Lucas. "Mr. Lucas, I'll scout ahead," he said naturally. "I've heard of Carnford scouts and Roland's cavalry in the area. We're a large target." Lucas, a stout merchant, nodded. "Go, be careful. Report back immediately if you see anything." "Understood." Franz rode off at a steady pace, careful not to draw suspicion by moving too fast. Once out of sight, he stopped, his expression turning grim. His mission wasn't scouting. He had to reach Roland at Cliff Fort before the Empress Dowager's army arrived. While Roland was a brilliant commander who could likely hold the fort, a surprise attack would inevitably cause unnecessary casualties. He had to warn Roland so he could prepare properly. Taking a breath of the crisp autumn air, Franz looked at the rising sun. It was a perfect day for a long ride. He spurred his horse and led the spare, using the 2-horse rotation technique to maximize his speed and endurance. By alternating mounts, he could keep his horses fresh and cover significantly more ground than a single rider. Franz galloped southeast along the main road. He remained hypervigilant, knowing that one encounter with a patrol could ruin everything. He had to avoid all checkpoints and enemy scouts at all costs. Along the way, he spotted 2 large camps of at least 1,000 men each, currently breaking down tents and loading supplies. The enemy was on the move. Soldiers were loading supplies while officers barked orders, signaling an urgent, large-scale military mobilization. This confirmed Franz's suspicion. The Empress Dowager was going all in. She was marshaling every resource to crush Roland before the Carnford army arrived, a move with catastrophic potential. Messengers galloped along the roads, the atmosphere heavy with the impending war. Franz kept a low profile, avoiding all unnecessary contact. He avoided eye contact with passing riders, feigning a hurried pace. When questioned, he used a fluent southern accent to claim he was carrying urgent dispatches from the royal capital to the southeastern front. With the roads flooded by messengers and rumors, no one suspected him. Trained by the Intelligence Bureau, he could mimic various regional dialects, from coastal merchants to mountain hunters, a skill that often proved life-saving. He had a 400-mile journey from the royal capital to Cliff Fort, requiring at least 2 days and a night of hard riding. Franz dared not slacken. He had to reach Roland before the Empress Dowager's forces to ensure a prepared defense. At noon, he stopped at a creek to water his horses and eat a meager meal. The coarse flour biscuit was hard and tasteless, but it served its purpose. He scanned the surroundings: clear water, small fish, and wild shrubs. In peaceful times, it would have been a pleasant spot for a picnic. With no time for scenery, he checked his horses, fed them bean cakes, inspected the tack, and resumed his journey. The afternoon was grueling. The sun beat down on the increasingly barren, desolate fields. Most land lay fallow, overgrown with weeds, dotted with the ruins of long-abandoned farmhouses. Refugees, displaced by war and taxes, were everywhere. They wandered aimlessly, gaunt and ragged, seeking hope in a land already bled dry by conflict. Franz passed a family of 5 huddled on a rickety cart, pulled by a frail old man. The children were barefoot and hollow-eyed. A woman cradled a weak, barely crying infant. The old man moved with agonizing slowness. Franz slowed down and tossed a few copper coins onto their cart. The old man nodded in silent gratitude. Franz rode on, knowing the pittance changed little, but it might buy them one more meal. He frequently passed corpses, some starved, others clearly victims of violence. In this lawless era, human life was cheap, left to be scavenged by wild dogs and crows. He saw a wild dog gnawing on a body, It snarled at him before returning to its meal. Franz felt a surge of bitterness. He knew the cruelty of war, where the power struggles of the elite crushed the common folk who were never heard or seen by those in the palace. He shook off the thoughts. He had a mission. Failing to deliver the intelligence would only lead to more death. By evening, he reached a small town, checked into a cheap inn, and rested after ensuring his horses were fed. He slept lightly, his military instincts alert. When a troop of cavalry thundered past at midnight, he watched from the window, relieved he hadn't been on the road. Before dawn, he departed. The morning air was biting, and his breath turned to mist. He tightened his leather armor and rode southeast. The second day was more dangerous as he entered the border of Roland's territory. He took back roads to avoid both the Empress Dowager's patrols and potential enemy outposts. The mountain path was silent save for falling leaves and bird calls. Franz stayed alert, his hand never far from his sword. Rounding a bend, he encountered a group of ragged soldiers resting by the road. They looked like stragglers, but he approached with caution. "Who goes there?" one demanded. "Messenger from the royal capital," Franz replied in his southern accent. "Heading to the front." "Which unit are you?" The leader shook his head. "3rd Infantry Regiment. We were routed 2 days ago. Roland's men are brutal. Less than half of us made it out." Franz remained calm. "You've clashed with Roland's forces?" "They're like madmen," the soldier spat. "We were ambushed during reconnaissance. Our commander was killed instantly. We only survived by running." Franz learned that Roland had fortified Cliff Fort, repelling the Empress Dowager's initial probes. Unaware that a larger force was approaching, Roland remained vigilant. Franz hurried on to deliver the warning. By dusk, Franz reached Cliff Fort. The gray stone fortress stood atop a hill, its thick walls flying the Confort flag. Patrols circled the surrounding camps and watchtowers. At the gate, Franz presented his Confort Intelligence Bureau badge and Richter's sealed orders. The guards immediately escorted him to Roland. Roland was studying a map in the council hall. He looked up, his expression sharp and steady as Franz entered. "Franz, what's happened at the royal capital?" Roland asked, his voice calm but concerned. Franz knelt. "General, the Empress Dowager has sent Count Eisenberg with a large army to launch a surprise attack. I infiltrated their supply train. Their vanguard arrives by tomorrow evening." Roland smirked, unfazed. "She still hasn't given up. Good. If she's coming to us, I'll ensure she never leaves." He turned to his adjutant. "Full combat readiness. Expand scout patrols. Call a meeting of all officers tonight." As the adjutant left, Roland patted Franz's shoulder. "Well done. Go get some rest. I'll handle the rest." Relieved that his mission was complete, Franz stood, his exhaustion finally catching up with him. Outside, the castle stirred under the moonlight. The sounds of soldiers preparing for battle echoed through the night. Franz breathed in the cool air, satisfied that his duty was done. The outcome now rested with Roland. Inside the Cliff Fort Command Center, the council hall was lit by candles, illuminating maps marked with enemy routes. Roland mentally traced every bridge and pass between the capital and the fort. He envisioned Count Eisenberg's weary troops marching through the dark, their weapons rattling in wagons. He looked at his veteran officers, their faces grim but determined. "Gentlemen," Roland began, "the Empress Dowager has sent Count Eisenberg and Victor to seize Cliff Fort and cut off our southern bridgehead. They expect us to be caught off guard. They are wrong. We hold the initiative." His deputy, Harold, suggested an ambush, but Roland shook his head. "Too risky. We don't know their exact route. Our mission is to hold the fort. Once we secure it, we can crush them later." Roland pointed to the map. "The fort is defensible, with steep slopes on 3 sides and thick granite walls. We have enough supplies to last 3 months. We won't just wait. We make them regret this. Here is the plan." The officers listened intently. "Engineers, reinforce walls, add chevaux de frise and abatis, widen the moat, and prep boiling oil. Scouts, expand range to 50 miles. Logistics, inventory all supplies. Officers, prepare your men for the incoming guests." The officers saluted and departed. Roland wrote a letter to me, confirming the fort's readiness, and sent it off. Watching the messenger leave, Roland looked out at the night, seeing the fires of the engineers at work. The sounds of construction formed a tense rhythm in the night air. Roland felt a surge of excitement. He was ready for the coming struggle. By morning, the fort was transformed. The battlements were raised, stocked with logs and stones. The moat was widened to 5 yards and deepened, with sharpened stakes creating a deadly perimeter. Soldiers organized arrows and calibrated ballistae for long-range defense. Cauldrons of pitch and oil were prepared, filling the air with their pungent scent. The main gate was reinforced with iron plating and internal wooden beams to withstand siege engines. Roland, in chainmail, inspected the defenses, personally checking on his men and earning their loyalty. The engineer commander showed him a reinforced section. Even a catapult won't crack this. Roland tested the stone and nodded. Good. How is the rest? Almost done. The eastern wall will be finished by dusk. Excellent. Let the men rest. The real fight begins soon. The engineer battalion commander grinned. Don't worry, General. We're used to this. It's just war. I patted my shoulder and walked to the battlements. The horizon was eerily calm, but I knew Eisenberg's forces were closing in. On the third evening, a breathless scout captain rushed into the council hall. I, mid-discussion, knew the news immediately. General, Eisenberg's vanguard, 2,000 light infantry, has reached Green Village, 40 miles away. The main force arrives by noon tomorrow. I studied the map. Green Village sat on the main road to the royal capital, offering flat, easy terrain for the enemy's approach to Cliff Fort. Did their scouts spot you? I asked. Unlikely. They have double sentries and mobile patrols, making close reconnaissance difficult, but we maintained our distance. I nodded. Well done. Get some rest. We have a busy day ahead. The scout saluted and left. I calculated. 40 miles meant the enemy would arrive by noon tomorrow. We had one night to prepare. Highest alert, I ordered. Cancel all leave. Kitchens will prepare 3 days of rations, and the medical officer must ready supplies for casualties. Orders rippled through the castle. The soldiers, bolstered by strong walls and clear leadership, remained calm. The psychological advantage of preparation was their greatest weapon. At dawn on the 4th day, the watchtower horn signaled the enemy's arrival. The piercing sound galvanized the garrison. Soldiers grabbed weapons, ballista crews adjusted their aim, and archers checked their gear. I scanned the horizon with binoculars. A massive force approached, 300 cavalry leading infantry phalanxes, followed by siege engines, catapults, battering rams, and scaling ladders. Count Eisenberg had arrived. I smirked. Stay calm. No unauthorized sorties. Ballistae, wait until they are in range. I observed the enemy's formation. They were exhausted from a forced march, significantly reducing their combat effectiveness. I noted the limited siege equipment, only 3 catapults and 2 rams. Eisenberg had gambled on a surprise attack. Now, he was forced into a costly frontal assault against a prepared fortress. Count Eisenberg surveyed Cliff Fort. Clad in gilded armor, the Count felt his heart sink. The fort was far more formidable than his intelligence suggested. The reinforced walls and widened moat proved I had anticipated everything. Damn it, Eisenberg cursed, turning to his advisor, Victor. You said this was secret. How did Roland know? Victor looked equally baffled. Our security was absolute, my lord. Perhaps there is a traitor in our ranks. Eisenberg's face darkened. If I find a traitor, I will tear them apart. Victor urged focus. Forget the traitor. We must take the castle. We have the numbers. We can win if we pay the price. Eisenberg steeled himself, his eyes hardening as he looked at the fort. Camp for 2 hours. Then we attack. 2 hours later, the assault began. 500 archers moved under shield cover, unleashing a hail of arrows. Most struck the battlements, but a few found their marks among the defenders. I stood tall, deflecting arrows with a small shield while tracking the enemy's infantry and their advancing scaling ladders. Ballistae, fire at the ladders. I commanded. Heavy stone bolts shattered the ladders and tore through the ranks. Despite the carnage, the enemy pressed forward. Archers, free fire. The defenders rained arrows down, inflicting heavy casualties, yet the enemy's sheer numbers kept the pressure constant. As the first ladders hit the walls, the battle turned into a brutal melee of spears, falling stones, and boiling oil. A hulking soldier climbed the wall with a battle axe, only to be skewered by spears and decapitated by a sword, his body tumbling back onto his comrades. After 3 failed waves and a blood-soaked moat, Eisenberg ordered a retreat at sunset. The enemy camp was somber. They had lost nearly 1,000 men to the defenders' 200. "We cannot continue this way," Victor warned. "Roland's defense is too tight. We will exhaust our army before we ever breach the walls." Eisenberg paced his tent, agitated. "What now? If we retreat, how do I answer to the Empress Dowager?" Victor mused. "A direct assault is impossible, but we could try guile. I've heard Cliff Fort has a secret passage leading inside. We could send an elite squad to infiltrate and open the gates." Eisenberg stopped, eyes brightening. "A secret passage? Are you certain?" "It's a rumor, but worth the risk. I've sent men to question local villagers. We should have answers soon." Eisenberg nodded. "Good. If that passage exists, we still have a chance." Yet, Eisenberg remained unaware that his every move was under Roland's watch. That night, Roland received reports of the enemy scouting for the passage. He smiled at his adjutant. "It seems Eisenberg wants a shortcut. Fine, I'll give him a surprise." He whispered instructions, and the adjutant nodded with a cunning grin. The next day, guided by a local hunter, Eisenberg found the hidden entrance in a dense forest west of the castle, supposedly built for wartime supply transport. Overjoyed, Eisenberg selected 200 elites to infiltrate at night, while launching a diversionary frontal assault to distract the garrison. As night fell, the diversion began with thunderous drums and shouts, while the elite squad slipped into the dark, narrow passage. The soldiers crawled through the damp, moldy tunnel for an hour until they reached a wooden door. The lead officer signaled his men to draw weapons, then pushed the unlocked door open and charged inside. Instead of a granary, they found a brightly lit, empty hall. Roland sat in the center, sipping wine, watching them with a smile. "Welcome," Roland toasted the stunned soldiers. "I've been waiting a long time." Hidden doors flew open, and armed soldiers swarmed the intruders. The lead officer turned pale, realizing they had been baited. "Surrender," Roland said, standing up. "Your plan has failed. Lay down your weapons, and I guarantee your safety." Seeing no escape, the officer and his men dropped their weapons in defeat. Roland had orchestrated the entire trap, using a fake hunter to lead them into an ambush. Upon hearing his elite squad was wiped out, Eisenberg roared in fury, "Roland, you despicable wretch! I will kill you." Victor looked grim. The loss of 200 elites and the soldiers' growing superstitious fear of Roland meant the siege was effectively over. "My lord, we must retreat," Victor advised. "Morale is broken. Let's return to the royal capital and regroup." Eisenberg reluctantly agreed. "Pass the order. Rest tonight. Retreat at dawn." By morning, the enemy camp was empty. Eisenberg had slipped away under the cover of darkness. In the council hall, the officers cheered. Harold slammed the table. "Those cowards finally ran." Roland smiled, looking out the window. He knew this peace was temporary. The Empress Dowager would not stop here. "Clean the battlefield," Roland ordered. "Send scouts to ensure they are truly retreating and not playing tricks." Left alone, Roland sat down to write a detailed report to me, confirming Cliff Fort remained secure. After sealing the letter, he closed his eyes, exhausted but ready for the greater challenges ahead. A messenger galloped into the Lord's manor at Carnford, rushing toward the council hall with an urgent dispatch. I was reviewing Northern Territory settlement plans when the breathless messenger arrived at the door. "My lord, urgent report from Cliff Fort." The messenger knelt, holding the letter high. I scanned the letter, my expression shifting from gravity to a faint, satisfied smile. I tucked the parchment away. "Well done. Go rest." The civil officials looked on, anxious. "My lord, has something happened in the north?" "Nothing major," I replied calmly. The Empress Dowager sent Eisenberg to sneak attack Cliff Fort, but Roland repelled them. A sneak attack? The officials panicked. Should we send reinforcements? Unnecessary. I sipped my tea. Roland defeated them. Eisenberg has retreated to the capital in disgrace. The fort is secure. The officials were stunned by my nonchalance regarding such a serious provocation. I explained. The Empress Dowager played her best hand and lost. We've seen her true strength now. She has nothing left to fear. I stood and looked out at the bustling, prosperous city of Carnford, confident in its rapid growth. The Empress Dowager thinks she can still rely on schemes to turn the tide, But the era has changed. Her decaying armies and obsolete tactics are no match for us, I declared. We needn't rush south. The Northern Territory needs time to consolidate and build strength before we strike. Officials were relieved. They had feared I would act impulsively due to provocation, but my calm, strategic wisdom reassured them. I sat down and picked up a roster. Let's return to the matter at hand. How is the immigrant resettlement progressing? The official reported that 37,000 immigrants were settled in 27 settlements around Frostguard, fully equipped with tools, seeds, and cattle. The first crops were already sown for next year's harvest. Is our food reserve sufficient until next year's harvest? I asked. We have 600,000 kilograms in storage, plus supplies from Carnford. It will suffice, though we should plan for further procurement if immigration continues to rise. I nodded, marking the roster. Control the pace of immigration to avoid chaos. Tell Edgar to send experienced officials from the Department of Civil Affairs to guide the settlers in adapting to the northern climate and maximizing land output. Understood, my lord. And the road construction? I inquired, picking up another file. The main roadbeds are finished. Gravel paving begins next spring. This will drastically improve transport efficiency between Frostguard and the settlements. Excellent. Roads are the lifeblood of development. Also, build post stations between settlements to stimulate commerce. The meeting lasted until noon. I made several key decisions, tending to the Northern Territory like a gardener cultivating a new plot. I focused entirely on construction, ignoring the Empress Dowager's southern antics. I knew that by securing my foundation, my enemies would eventually be swept away by history. As autumn faded, I rode north through the first snow to inspect the territory, clad in furs and mounted on my chestnut horse. I was pleased to see orderly wooden houses with smoking chimneys replacing the wilderness. Fields were harvested, and villagers waved as I passed. I stopped at a home belonging to Simon, a former southern tenant farmer who had fled high rents to try his luck in the north. Simon had been granted 50 acres, a plow ox, and seeds. My lord, you are our savior, Simon exclaimed. In the south, I worked myself to death and still went hungry. Here, you gave us land, food, and tools. It's a dream come true. I patted his shoulder. Work hard, and life will only get better. The soil here is fertile. Simon's family beamed with hope, firmly rooted in their new home. Inspecting the soil, I found it rich and dark, capable of yielding double the harvest of the southern lands. It's a tragedy this land lay fallow for years, I remarked. I ordered officials to organize large-scale reclamation for grains, flax, and livestock in the spring. The official diligently recorded my instructions. In Frostguard, the city was recovering. Solon-style decorations were replaced by practical Carnford architecture, and the markets were thriving with a variety of goods. I noted that imported goods were expensive due to transport costs. I ordered the development of local textile, iron, and pottery industries to reduce external reliance. At the town hall, I met with local representatives. They raised concerns about security, water shortages, and the lack of medical care. I promised to increase patrols, commission water conservancy experts for irrigation projects, and send graduates from the Carnford Medical College to establish clinics. The representatives were overjoyed. An elderly noble wept. I've seen many lords, but never one who truly serves the people like you. I remained humble, knowing that the people's support was the true foundation of my rule. Winter passed, and as the ice melted, the Northern Territory finally awakened. I implemented a series of sweeping reforms. First, land reform. Land granted to immigrants was inheritable but non-transferable to prevent land annexation. Reclamation was incentivized with subsidies. Second, a progressive tax system based on income ensured fairness, stimulating productivity. Third, infrastructure. I invested heavily in roads, bridges, and irrigation to optimize water distribution across the north. Fourth, social services. I established schools in every settlement and a mobile medical system staffed by Carnford graduates, with free hospital care in Frostguard for the severely ill. Fifth, commercial support. I offered 3-year tax exemptions for new businesses and established the Northern Chamber of Commerce to assist with financing and logistics. These reforms transformed the North entirely. Spring planting was a hive of activity. with settlers working the black soil with newfound vigor. By summer, the fields were lush with golden wheat and tall corn, promising a bountiful harvest. Come autumn, the harvest was massive. Threshing machines roared, and granaries overflowed with the scent of fresh grain. Grain production tripled, turning the North from a dependent region into an economic powerhouse with a surplus for export. Merchants flocked to the North, opening factories for flour, textiles, and ironwork, creating jobs and fueling a burgeoning commodity economy. Population growth surged as Southern farmers, hearing of the success, migrated by the thousands each month. Frostgard's population exceeded 50,000, becoming a bustling metropolis second only to Carnford. Emerging towns across the North became commercial and cultural hubs, complete with schools and markets. Another autumn harvest arrived. The fields were a sea of gold, and the sounds of celebration filled the air as granaries were filled to capacity. With over 100,000 immigrants and 1,000,000 acres reclaimed, the North was now a self-sufficient industrial and agricultural hub. Yet, my gaze remained fixed on the troubled South. News from the South was grim. The Empress Dowager's brutal taxation to fund her military had left the populace destitute and suffering. Rumors spread that the late king had intended to name Princess Isabella his heir, but the Empress Dowager had forged the decree and exiled the princess. Others whispered that King Sigmund was not the late King Heinrich's son, but the Empress Dowager's illegitimate child. These rumors, true or false, ignited widespread resentment against her rule. Small uprisings began to flicker across the South, waiting for a spark to ignite a wildfire. Seizing the moment, I issued a manifesto. The manifesto spread like lightning across the Plantagenet kingdom. It sent shockwaves through the realm. The document detailed the Empress Dowager's crimes, treason, corruption, and the illegitimacy of the king. It declared Princess Isabella the rightful heir. I pledged to march south to rectify the court, depose the usurper, and restore the kingdom's honor. Written with sharp logic and emotional weight, the manifesto exploited the people's nostalgia for King Heinrich and their hatred for the current regime. The entire kingdom was shaken. Oppressed commoners and loyalist nobles wept with hope upon reading it. The princess lives. Lord Karl is the true patriot, the people cried. Public opinion turned decisively against the Empress Dowager as the manifesto was posted and recited in every tavern and marketplace. For 3 months, the North prepared for war. Recruitment was overwhelming. I raised an army of 80,000, including my standing army and eager volunteers. Logistics were prioritized, grain was packed, weapons manufactured, and a 5,000 wagon transport team was organized to supply the front. I also launched a propaganda campaign, circulating letters from Princess Isabella and a list of the Empress Dowager's 10 crimes to ensure the southern populace knew exactly what they were fighting for. The manifesto concluded, by the princess's command, I raised this righteous army to purge the usurping empress, clear the court of her sycophants, and restore order. Let all loyal subjects of the Plantagenet kingdom rise. When the capital is reclaimed, peace shall return. The manifesto acted as a bombshell, sparking fervor in the South. Oppressed commoners saw a glimmer of hope, while local gentry and disgruntled officials secretly contacted me, offering to serve as internal allies. 3 months passed in a flash. In late autumn, I held a grand oath-taking ceremony outside the city of Frostgard. Under a clear autumn sky, 80,000 soldiers stood in vast, disciplined formations. Their deep blue uniforms gleamed, bayonets flashed, and banners obscured the sun as the air filled with the thunder of war horses. I, clad in new armor with a sword at my hip, strode onto the central platform. Surveying the sea of soldiers, my heart swelled with ambition. I raised my right hand, and the field fell silent. 80,000 pairs of eyes locked onto me. Soldiers, my voice boomed via amplification magic. We gather for a sacred mission, march south, eradicate the usurper, retrieve the princess, and save the realm. Many of you are from the Northern Territory or Southern migrants. You know the Empress's tyranny, how she forged the late king's decree, imprisoned the princess, and bled the kingdom dry. The North was once a land of suffering under Solonian invasion. We fought, reclaimed our homes, and built a prosperous life where children read and the sick are healed. We thrive, yet our southern brethren suffer under her yoke. Can we stand idly by? No, the crowd roared. Exactly, I shouted. We have the strength and duty to save them. Today, we march to overthrow the tyrant and welcome Princess Isabella. Let the entire Plantagenet kingdom become the paradise we have built in the north. Pointing my sword south, I commanded, march. Destination, the capital, Place City. The army erupted in thunderous cheers of long life. Drums beat and horns blared as the iron torrent began its southward flow. I, leading the vanguard, glanced back at Flossgard, whispering, wait for me. I shall return in victory. News of the southward march spread like wildfire across the kingdom. Villagers lined the roads to welcome the righteous army, offering food, supplies, and even joining the ranks. As I predicted, the southern populace, long-suffering, embraced their liberators. At the first major town, Greenville, the Empress's loyalist commander Marcus intended to resist, but the citizens revolted, opening the gates that night. My forces disarmed Marcus and his guards without a fight. I immediately opened the granaries to feed the starving populace. The grateful citizens flocked to enlist, eager to join the crusade against the Empress. Greenville's liberation set a precedent. My army swept through a dozen towns, meeting little resistance as garrisons surrendered or were overwhelmed by welcoming mobs. The army grew like a snowball. Half a month later, I reached a point 200 miles from the capital, my force swollen to 120,000 men. The Empress, shocked and enraged by the rapid advance, summoned her ministers to discuss countermeasures. The court was paralyzed by fear. Her former sycophants remained silent, knowing her rule was crumbling and that supporting her was a death sentence. You cowards, the Empress shrieked at the silent ministers. Useless when it matters most. She ordered her guard commander to mobilize all remaining forces and sent an urgent missive to Count Eisenberg to return with his army. As the commander left, the Empress collapsed, pale and desperate. She knew her reign was ending, but she refused to surrender without one final struggle. I enforced strict discipline, forbidding looting or harassment of civilians. My clerks posted proclamations in every town, promising tax relief and the end of tyranny once the Empress was deposed. These measures worked instantly. Even the skeptical were won over by the army's conduct. Volunteers flooded the ranks, and laborers offered their services, ensuring the army's strength increased despite the need to garrison captured towns. Simultaneously, heartening news arrived from the southeast. Franz delivered intelligence of the Empress's ambush attempt to Clift Fort. Roland, alerted, maintained a facade of normalcy while secretly positioning his main force for an ambush. Count Eisenberg and Victor, expecting to catch Roland off guard, marched into his trap. The Carnford garrison struck from all sides with muskets and artillery. Eisenberg was killed by stray fire, and Victor was captured by Roland's cavalry after a desperate, failed breakout. The Empress's elite force was decimated. Roland secured Clift Fort, capturing significant supplies and high-ranking loyalists. The victory boosted morale, removed the threat to my rear, and signaled to neutral factions that the Empress's time was up. Meanwhile, my main force shattered the Empress's southern defensive lines. Local commanders, seeing the tide turn, chose surrender or flight over dying for a doomed regime. My army reached a position just 2 days' march from the capital. Panic gripped Place City. Nobles scrambled to send secret overtures to me or prepare their escape, while diehards realized their resistance was futile. The Empress sat in her empty throne room, trembling as she read reports of Eisenberg's death and the army's approach. Her power had collapsed like a sandcastle. She could not comprehend her failure. She had calculated everything except the people's will, a force that rendered her military might meaningless. Outside, dark clouds gathered as the blue banners of Carnford drew ever closer to the capital. 100 miles from the capital, I encountered my first major resistance. Count Eisenberg had fortified Eagle Nest Ridge, a narrow, steep pass, intending to make a final stand with 30,000 troops. I surveyed the terrain with a telescope. A strong position, I told Roland. A frontal assault would be too costly. Roland agreed, noting that scouts were searching for a detour. A scout returned. There is a narrow path on the west side, impassable for an army, but it leads behind the ridge. My eyes lit up. Where does it exit? 5 miles behind the ridge, near a forest. I decided. Roland, you lead the frontal feint. I will take an elite unit through the path for a pincer attack. Roland protested the risk, but I waved him off, insisting he focus on the frontal assault. That night, I and 3,000 elites navigated the narrow, pitch-black path. Emerging after 2 hours, they found the enemy camp illuminated by campfires, with most soldiers asleep. I ordered my men to split into 5 groups to strike the supplies and headquarters, signaling the attack with fire. The elite soldiers moved out like blades, ready to strike the enemy's heart. The news of the approaching army seeped into Place City, chilling the hearts of every resident. The bustling capital transformed into a suffocating, fearful cage. Panic reigned supreme. Streets once vibrant were now desolate. Shops were boarded up, and pedestrians hurried by, heads bowed, fearing the encroaching storm. Only a few grain and medicine shops remained open, surrounded by desperate, anxious crowds of both rich and poor. Prices skyrocketed. Grain became worth more than gold. Profiteers thrived while families starved, unable to afford basic sustenance. The city gates were jammed with refugees, but the Empress had ordered them sealed. Archers on the walls shot those attempting to flee, leaving bodies to rot as a grim warning. Those trapped returned home, awaiting the inevitable storm. Within the grand estates, the atmosphere was equally frantic. Loyalists debated whether to hold out or defect, their secret meetings filled with tension. Many packed their valuables and sent secret letters to my camp, hoping to secure their future. Zhao, a high-ranking minister and loyalist, sat in his study, sighing. His son begged him to defect. "Do you think we have a choice?" Zhao asked. "I have offended too many to be forgiven by me." His son urged him to try, citing my reputation for leniency toward defectors. "Enough." Zhao slammed the table. "I have been loyal to the Emperor's Karl whole life. I will never bow to that northern bumpkin." Late at night, Lord Zhao slipped out of his manor, disappearing into the darkness. His son watched him go, filled with a sense of impending doom. The Empress Dowager's rule collapsed in days. Her courtiers scrambled to destroy evidence, hide assets, or find new patrons, while others hid in terror, hoping to survive the purge. Amidst the city's panic, the Empress Dowager's private chambers remained eerily silent. She sat alone on her sandalwood throne, adorned with Plantagenet carvings. She issued no orders and asked for no reports, sitting motionless like a soulless statue. Watching the shifting sunlight, she reflected on her life, from a lowly maid to the powerful Empress Dowager. She had clawed her way to the top through blood and schemes, only to see it all end. A secret letter lay before her, confirming the truth that pierced her heart. The princess she thought dead was alive, held by me in Carnford. She had believed her past crimes were buried, having fabricated the princess's death to secure her position. But I, the youth from the Northern Territory, had found the princess and used her as a rallying cry to dismantle her rule and push her toward ruin. The Empress Dowager looked at the gray sky and let out a hollow, mocking laugh of despair. "Heinrich, do you see? Your daughter lives? You must be laughing at me from the grave," she whispered, caressing the letter like a blade. She retrieved a jeweled dagger gifted by the late King Heinrich. Holding the cold weapon, she felt a surge of complex emotions. She remembered Heinrich's former tenderness, which turned to betrayal when he loved another. Her love had withered into a hatred for him, his lover, and their child. She would not surrender. She would die with the dignity of an Empress Dowager rather than kneel before me and that girl. Yet, she would not die easily. She had one final card to play, ensuring I would suffer a regret that would haunt me forever. She summoned her last loyal servant and gave a chilling order. The servant left, pale-faced, as a sinister smile touched her lips. Outside Place City, the Carnford Army's camp stretched for miles. The camp was a model of order, with disciplined soldiers and fresh supplies, a stark contrast to the starving, chaotic city. My command tent was brightly lit. I avoided a direct assault to minimize casualties and preserve the capital, preferring political leverage to end the siege. I waited for the city's opportunistic nobility to defect, knowing they would abandon the cornered Empress Dowager. Secret envoys, officers, guards, and officials began slipping into my camp, offering intelligence and pledges of loyalty. I welcomed them, promising safety and rewards in exchange for their cooperation to open the city gates. I broadcasted a message of amnesty for all except the Empress Dowager's core faction, aiming to fracture her remaining support. That evening, Franz returned to the camp with an unexpected, high-profile guest. I was pleasantly surprised and ordered them brought in immediately. A weary, dust-covered Franz entered, followed by a tall, rugged man who removed his helmet. I laughed in delight. "Roland, what are you doing here? What about Clift Fort?" It was General Roland, who should have been guarding the southern fortress against a counterattack. Roland smiled. "The fort is secure. I left my deputy in charge to join Franz in infiltrating the capital to scout its defenses." He presented a detailed map of the city, including gates, guard posts, and secret palace tunnels. I marveled at the precision of the map, noting the secret waterways that would allow my troops to bypass the walls. Roland credited Franz for the dangerous work of contacting insiders and gathering the intelligence. Franz humbly replied that it was his duty to the Intelligence Bureau to help me pacify the realm. I praised my loyal officers, declaring that by tomorrow morning, the spruce banner would fly over Place City. The tent was filled with laughter. Victory was within reach. At dawn, a messenger from the Carnford camp rode toward the city gates, waving a white flag. He shouted to the guards, demanding to deliver an ultimatum to the Empress Dowager. A nervous commander appeared on the wall, asking for the message. The messenger read my ultimatum: surrender the Empress Dowager and restore the princess, or face total destruction. The guards wavered, and the commander's expression turned uncertain. The messenger fired a copy of the document into the city and rode away. Inside the palace, the Empress Dowager read the ultimatum. Dressed in formal attire, she sat in silence for a long time. She reached for the dagger on her table. "Carl, you think I would beg?" she whispered with a cold, resolute smile. "I would rather die." She took one last look at the palace that had been the stage for her power and her crimes. She walked to a hidden chamber to retrieve her final secret, a gift for me. Inside, a faint weeping sound emerged. She looked at the figure huddled in the corner. "Don't blame me," she whispered. "Blame your royal blood." That afternoon, the gates of Place City opened without a fight. Pressured by the ultimatum, the opportunistic nobles seized control and signaled the Carnford army to enter. I sent in an advance guard to secure the city before entering myself, flanked by my personal guards. Citizens watched in a mix of awe and trepidation as I rode through the streets with calm dignity. I addressed the public in the main square, promising to restore order, remove corrupt officials, and ease the tax burden. I then proceeded to the royal palace. The palace guards stood with heads bowed, trembling as the Carnford forces arrived. I climbed the palace steps, feeling the weight of the responsibility I was assuming. Inside, I learned the Empress Dowager had committed suicide that morning. I ordered a proper burial, acknowledging her former status as the nation's mother. Her death ended the old era, but I knew the work of rebuilding and securing the kingdom had just begun. I stood in the great hall, touching the cold armrest of the throne. Facing the kneeling officials, I declared, "From today, the Plantagenet kingdom turns a new page." My voice echoed through the city, met by the deafening cheers of the people. In the north, Charlotte stood in the garden of the Lord's manor, holding our child, Klein, and looking south with a hopeful smile. "Klein, do you hear? Your father has one," she whispered. The child reached toward the south, as if touching his father. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. The long wait had finally ended. She watched a flock of geese flying south, crossing the clouds. Just like her husband, it had been 3 days since I entered Place City. Over 3 days, order returned to the royal capital. Streets were cleared, shops reopened, and Carnford's patrols maintained strict discipline, easing the citizens' anxieties. Yet, beneath this calm, undercurrents remained. The Empress Dowager was dead, but her faction lingered. Nobles who had surrendered to me now feared retribution for their past complicity, leading them to conspire in secret for self-preservation. Meanwhile, the princess's whereabouts remained a mystery. A servant had spirited the princess away before the Empress Dowager's death, and both had vanished. My inability to locate her threatened the legitimacy of my cleansing the court campaign. I also faced the dilemma of how to handle the surrendered faction. Mass purges risked instability, while total amnesty would alienate my supporters and mock the victims of the previous regime. I needed a balance between justice and order. Late on the third night, my study remained lit. I reviewed the Intelligence Bureau's list of the Empress Dowager's core conspirators. Hesitating, I left several names unmarked. A soft knock sounded. Enter. Roland entered, weary from travel, and took a seat. My lord, it is late. Why not rest? Roland asked. I sighed. The capital is a powder keg. The Empress Dowager left a mess far harder to manage than she was. Roland paused, then asked, May I speak freely? I nodded. Of course. The faction must be purged, but not entirely, Roland advised. I raised an eyebrow. Explain. The entire bureaucracy is tied to her. A total purge would leave you with no one to govern. Furthermore, if the surrendered nobles feel death is inevitable, they will fight back, plunging the city into chaos. Roland continued. We must distinguish between ringleaders and coerced followers. Punish the worst offenders to satisfy justice, and offer the rest a chance to serve the new order. I pondered this. But how do I define ringleader without appearing weak? Roland smiled. I have a candidate for that. Who? Victor. I realized. The advisor captured at Cliff Fort? Exactly. He is notorious. Executing him publicly will demonstrate your resolve and warn others, while you can handle the rest with more nuance. I stood and clapped Roland on the shoulder. You are not just a soldier, but a statesman. You make my burden much lighter. Roland bowed modestly. I only aim to serve, my lord. I agreed. We proceed tomorrow. Victor will face public judgment. The next morning, the central square of Place City was packed. I ordered a public trial for Victor, drawing a massive crowd eager to see the fallen power broker judged. Victor, stripped of his finery and dressed in rags, was dragged onto the platform. He trembled, realizing he was now at the mercy of the people he once despised. A judge read the charges: tampering with the royal decree, corruption, and treason. Each count was backed by evidence, inciting the crowd's fury. Kill him, the crowd roared. He deserves 1,000 deaths. Hearing the vitriol, Victor collapsed, weeping and begging for his life. The judge remained unmoved. Victor, you are guilty of heinous crimes. Under kingdom law, you are sentenced to immediate execution. The crowd erupted in cheers. 2 executioners dragged the sobbing Victor to the block. He struggled in vain as the blade caught the sunlight. The blade fell. Victor's head rolled, and the crowd's cheers reached a deafening crescendo. I watched from a high building as the square erupted in hope. Victor's execution had shattered the Empress Dowager's shadow of fear. Justice, though delayed, had finally arrived. The execution galvanized public support and intimidated the Empress Dowager's remaining loyalists. Many low-level officials surrendered to the Carnford army, confessing their crimes. My leniency policy allowed those with minor offenses to retain their posts, stabilizing the new administration. While the capital's situation improved, the princess's whereabouts remained a heavy burden on my mind. 3 days after the execution, Intelligence Bureau Chief Richter entered my study, visibly excited. My lord, we found her, Richter exclaimed. I stood up abruptly. The princess? Yes, Richter nodded, his expression turning odd. But the situation is unexpected. I frowned. Explain. The attendant who took her was murdered, but he had hidden her in an abandoned house within the city. However, the princess. What about her? I pressed. She doesn't know her true identity, Richter explained. Raised as a commoner by the Empress Dowager's agents, she believes she is an orphan. She thinks we are liars when we tell her she is the last of the Plantagenet bloodline. I sat back, rubbing my temples. A princess raised as a commoner, ignorant of her heritage, posed a massive challenge for legitimacy and governance. I looked at Richter. Where is she? She is in a secure, guarded location. She is stable but remains skeptical of our claims. I decided, take me to her. I will speak with her myself. Richter hesitated. Is that not too risky, my lord? I waved him off. She is the sole heir and the justification for my campaign. I must confirm her status and ensure she understands her duty. Richter bowed. Understood, my lord. I will make the arrangements. That night, Richter led me to a nondescript house in a remote corner of the city. After passing through layers of guards, I entered. The room was sparse. A young girl of about 18 sat reading by dim light. She wore a simple cloth dress, her hair tied back. She looked like any other commoner, devoid of royal elegance. Seeing the group, she stood up, wary. "Who are you?" I dismissed my guards and sat opposite her. "I am Carl of Carnford. You have likely heard what they said about your origins." The girl bit her lip. "They said I am a princess, the daughter of King Heinrich." "How?" "I am just an orphan who grew up in a nursery." I placed a small, exquisite jade pendant on the table. It bore the Plantagenet crest and the name Irene. The girl stared at the pendant, stunned. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, tears welling in her eyes. "This is," she whispered. "A keepsake from your mother, the late queen," I said. "She entrusted you to a loyal attendant to save you from the coup. He raised you in hiding to protect you from the Empress Dowager." Tears streamed down her face as she recalled her foster father's final, unspoken words. She realized her life had been a lie. I waited for her to compose herself. "I know this is overwhelming. You have lived a simple life, and now you are told you are the rightful heir." I continued earnestly. "Irene, or rather, Your Highness, the kingdom is at a turning point. The old order is gone. Your existence is vital for stability. My campaign was fought to restore the princess. Without you, this nation may fall into chaos." Irene looked at him, eyes filled with uncertainty. "Can I really be a princess? I know nothing. I can barely read." I smiled gently. "No one is born a ruler. You will learn, and I will provide the best tutors. You don't need to govern immediately. I will handle the affairs of state until you are ready. You only need to stand up and claim your identity." After a long silence, Irene wiped her tears, her voice gaining a hint of resolve. I am willing to try." I felt a wave of relief. Her public appearance would provide the legitimacy my new regime desperately needed. I stood and bowed. "Then, Your Highness, welcome home." Outside, the dawn light began to dispel the darkness. A new day, and a new fate for the Plantagenet kingdom, had begun. 3 days later, the cathedral in Place City hosted its grandest ceremony in decades. Sunlight streamed through stained glass, depicting the Plantagenet kings. The cathedral was packed with nobles, generals, merchants, and commoners, all eager to witness the princess. Today, the long-lost heir would finally appear, receive the archbishop's blessing, and address the nation. The cathedral was thick with anticipation. Elderly onlookers, who remembered the glory of King Heinrich's coronation, wept as they prepared to witness the restoration of the royal line. I stood at the front in a dark blue suit adorned with the Carnford spruce emblem. Though calm, I was tense. The princess's debut was the linchpin of my legitimacy. I had meticulously coached the archbishop to ensure the ceremony proceeded without incident. I scanned the nobles. Some were hopeful, others inscrutable, and some likely harbored treasonous intent. I remained unfazed, confident in my ability to neutralize any threat. I glanced at Richter, the intelligence bureau chief. Dressed as an unassuming minor noble, Richter's hawk-like gaze swept the crowd. His plainclothes agents were positioned everywhere to suppress any disturbances. The organ began the solemn Plantagenet coronation march. As the melody filled the air, the cathedral doors swung open. Irene appeared, dressed in a white gown embroidered with golden sparrows and wearing a delicate silver crown. She looked regal. The sunlight caught her, casting a holy glow that masked her youthful innocence. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Skeptics were silenced by her striking resemblance to the young King Heinrich. An old noble wept, exclaiming that she was the spitting image of the late king. Irene trembled under the weight of hundreds of scrutinizing eyes. She felt exposed, longing to flee back to her simple, anonymous life. Then she met my gaze. I offered a subtle, encouraging nod that whispered, "You can do this. Believe in yourself." She recalled my advice. "You don't need to be perfect. Just be brave and tell them who you are. We will handle the rest." Straightening her posture, she walked firmly down the red carpet. Nobles bowed as she passed, but she ignored the whispers, focusing solely on the archbishop at the altar. The archbishop, a kind-eyed man who had served under the late king, watched her approach with deep emotion. He felt as though the late king's spirit was watching through him, finally seeing his daughter return. Irene knelt at the altar, her heart racing. The scent of incense and old wood filled the air as the organ's low hum vibrated through her. The archbishop placed the Bible on her head, reciting the ancient, solemn blessing in Latin. The congregation fell into a reverent silence. May the Lord protect you and the Plantagenet kingdom. Rule with wisdom, justice, and compassion, and be the light of this nation. The archbishop finished by marking her forehead with a cross. Irene stood and faced the crowd. Her voice, though youthful, rang out clearly. I, Irene von Plantagenet, daughter of King Heinrich, declare to you all, I have returned. Her voice was thin, yet every word carried perfectly through the silent cathedral. I thank the Archbishop, Lord Karl, for his loyalty, and all who remain faithful to the kingdom, she continued, gaining composure. Fate has brought me from a humble life to this responsibility. She paused, meeting the eyes of the nobles. I have much to learn about governance, but I am committed to growing for the sake of this nation and its people. I hope to become a monarch worthy of my father. A wave of applause erupted, drowning out the last of the skepticism. Even the cynical nobles were moved by her poise and sincerity. I smiled in relief. The most difficult hurdle had been cleared. The princess's successful appearance sent shockwaves through the capital's nobility. Hesitant nobles rushed to pledge loyalty, flooding my temporary residence with gifts and tributes. The line of carriages stretched around the corner. I welcomed them all. I knew most were opportunists, but I understood that politics required compromise and the unification of all available forces during this transition. Still, I remained vigilant. I ordered Richter to investigate these new allies. The corrupt were marked for future purging, while those with minor pasts were given menial roles to test their loyalty. One visitor, however, stood out. Viscount Leonard, an elderly statesman who had retired in protest of the Empress Dowager's corruption years ago, had traveled from the south specifically to pledge his service. I received him personally. The Viscount, though aged, spoke with the dignity of a bygone era. I served the late king and could do nothing when he died. Seeing his bloodline return allows me to die in peace. Tears in his eyes, he added. I am old, but I offer my remaining strength to help restore the kingdom. I felt genuine respect. Men like Leonard were the true backbone of the realm. Helping the old man up, I said, your loyalty is noted. We need men of your wisdom to help rebuild. I will rely on you once the princess is crowned. I shall serve until my last breath, the Viscount vowed. Leonard's public support triggered a wave of similar pledges from other minor nobles, solidifying my rule. Yet, shadows still lingered. The Empress Dowager's network was vast. Her remnants, initially terrified, realized that if I and the princess solidified power, they would be purged. They chose to strike back. A secret alliance formed, comprised of former officials and wealthy merchants. They pooled resources to plot a coup. Their plan: launch a surprise armed rebellion, seize the palace, capture the princess, and issue a decree branding me a traitor. They had even bribed disgruntled regional commanders. They underestimated Richter. Richter had shifted the intelligence bureau's focus to internal surveillance. His agents had already infiltrated the capital and detected the conspirators' secret meetings. Richter watched patiently, mapping their entire network and plan, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. On the eve of the planned rebellion, he presented the full dossier to me. I read the report and remarked, it seems some people refuse to learn until they see their own coffins. Can you catch them all? I asked. Richter smiled coldly. Everything is prepared. They won't leave the trap alive. Good, I replied. But keep them alive. I want them to confess their crimes publicly. Understood. That night, the city was dark and silent. Most citizens slept, unaware of the brewing insurrection. At midnight, 300 rebels gathered in an abandoned warehouse in the West District. Their plan was to strike the palace, my residence, and the garrison simultaneously. A masked leader stood on a crate, inciting them. Karl thinks he's safe. Once we have the princess, he's finished. Riches await us all. The rebels cheered, arming themselves for the final push. Suddenly, torches flared on the rooftops, turning the warehouse into a brightly lit stage. The rebels froze in terror. Ambush, someone screamed. It was too late. A hail of musket fire erupted from all sides. Carnford soldiers, following Richter's orders, had the building surrounded. Bullets tore through the wooden walls. Panic ensued. Some rebels were gunned down, Others were trapped by fires started by the soldiers, and many threw down their weapons, begging for mercy. The battle ended in less than half an hour. Half the rebels were dead, the rest captured. Carnford suffered only a dozen minor injuries. By morning, notices were posted throughout the city, detailing the failed coup, listing the traitors, and announcing a public trial. The documents bore my seal and the princess's signature. The swift, decisive crushing of the rebellion cemented my reputation. The public was awestruck by my efficiency. Any remaining fence-sitters realized that opposing the Northern Lord was a death sentence. With the rebellion crushed, the capital was finally stable. The Empress Dowager's remnants were effectively eradicated, and my authority was absolute. With the crisis averted, I turned my full attention to mentoring Princess Irene. I hired scholars to teach Irene history, law, and diplomacy. I had her shadow court meetings to observe state operations and held long discussions with her on governance. Irene studied diligently, rising before dawn and working late into the night. Her rapid progress impressed all her tutors. One day, I found Irene frowning over a map in her study. "What are you thinking about?" I asked softly. Irene pointed to iron-rich regions. She noted that connecting the resource-rich north with the agricultural south and coastal ports could boost revenue, but she feared the nobility would resist such trade reforms. I was impressed by her insight. I explained that while reform is essential for growth, it inevitably threatens vested interests. The key is managing the pace and balancing pressure with support. I suggested piloting new policies in my direct territory of Carnford to prove their efficacy, rewarding cooperative nobles while using market forces to pressure the stubborn. Irene listened intently, gaining a deeper understanding of my systematic approach to governance. She resolved to grow into a capable monarch. I felt relieved, viewing Irene's growth as vital to the kingdom's future. I committed to being her steadfast support. Sunlight bathed the desk and the map, symbolizing the quiet birth of a new future for the Plantagenet kingdom. With the rebellion crushed, the capital, Place City, finally found peace. It was a true restoration of order. Shops reopened, the air filled with the sense of fresh bread and goods, and the city's bustling commerce returned. Taverns hummed with talk of tax cuts and the princess's promising demeanor. People spoke of my decisive leadership with a mix of awe and fear, quickly silencing any dissent regarding the new policy. Carnford patrols became a source of comfort rather than intimidation. Soldiers interacted warmly with children, a stark contrast to the predatory behavior of the Empress Dowager's era. I remained in a modest requisition mansion rather than the royal palace. This served as a political statement. I was a restorer of the legitimate line, not a usurper. Despite my modest quarters, I held the true power. My office was flooded with officials and petitioners, and I worked tirelessly into the night. I launched a series of reforms in administration, finance, justice, and the military to purge the corruption of the previous regime. The administrative system was bloated and inefficient, plagued by bureaucratic infighting and endless delays. I streamlined the government, cutting redundant positions and consolidating departments. I brought in loyal, efficient administrative talent from Carnford to ensure my policies were executed. I retained capable, veteran officials like Viscount Leonard as advisors, balancing the need for reform with the wisdom of experience. I ordered a national census and land survey to combat tax evasion by the nobility, who had hidden assets while burdening the peasantry. I replaced the Empress Dowager's arbitrary, oppressive taxes with a transparent, unified system, strictly forbidding local officials from levying extra fees. The relief was immense. One farmer sent a letter of gratitude, which I kept as a reminder of my duty. I reformed the legal system, banning barbaric punishments and mandating public trials. I established an appeals process to curb judicial corruption. I installed public complaint boxes monitored by the Intelligence Bureau. Corrupt officials were swiftly punished, forcing the bureaucracy to act with newfound restraint. I reorganized my army into a standing army, with the northern camp under Leon and the southern camp under Roland, securing the borders with 60,000 disciplined troops. I purged local garrisons of private militias loyal to nobles, replacing them with standardized, professional forces trained by Carnford officers. I viewed the military as the cornerstone of state security and invested heavily in its modernization. Corrupt officials and disgruntled nobles attempted to sabotage the reforms through passive resistance and secret coordination. I responded with iron-fisted justice. I publicly tried and exiled a noble named Marshall for tax evasion, effectively silencing further opposition. I balanced this with rewards for cooperative nobles, using a mix of honors and concessions to ensure the reforms moved forward. As the new policy took root, Irene began to step into the public eye. She transitioned from a student to a participant, attending meetings and observing the nuances of daily governance. I gradually delegated tasks like reviewing simple cases and meeting representatives. Irene approached these duties with humility, constantly reflecting on her performance. When she made a mistake in a land dispute, I guided her through the error. She took full responsibility and corrected her judgment, earning respect. Her growth impressed the court. I saw her development as my most important mission for the kingdom's future. A report arrived regarding a severe flood in the south, with officials desperate for aid. I handed the report to Irene, asking how she would handle it. Irene proposed immediate relief, an assessment of the damage, and measures to prevent disease and unrest. I asked who she would send to lead the mission. Irene suggested Hans from the Ministry of Finance, noting his efficiency and capability. I was pleased. Irene had accurately assessed her subordinate's strengths. I approved her choice, appointing Hans as the imperial envoy to oversee disaster relief. Irene felt a surge of pride and responsibility, realizing she was finally making a tangible impact on the lives of her people. With the capital stabilizing, I turned my attention to foreign affairs. The Plantagenet kingdom had long maintained a tributary system, but this peace relied entirely on the kingdom's perceived strength. Weakened by internal strife, the kingdom now faced opportunistic neighbors and tribes testing its borders and abandoning their tributes. Intelligence reports indicate abnormal activity on the eastern border. Tribes that previously paid tribute have ceased for 2 years, and armed scouts disguised as herdsmen have been spotted surveying the terrain with military precision. Meanwhile, the Principality of Volturnia, a southern neighbor, is acting hostile. Having encroached on disputed lands during the Plantagenet kingdom's internal strife, they are now fortifying their borders, fearing the kingdom's resurgence, a defensive posture that likely masks offensive intent. I remain vigilant, recognizing that internal stability is insufficient if external threats exploit my focus on reform. I cannot afford to ignore these risks while building my new regime. I adjusted my military posture, reinforcing southern and eastern defenses. I deployed experienced commanders to the east to lead a mobile cavalry force and fortified southern outposts with new beacon towers to establish a robust early warning system. I ordered the Intelligence Bureau to intensify surveillance on neighboring states, specifically the tribal leaders and the Duke of Volturnia, adhering to the principle that knowing one's enemy is essential for victory. I sent a diplomat to Volturnia with gifts and a message. The Plantagenet kingdom desires peace, but does not fear war. I made it clear that while they prefer friendship, they are fully prepared to meet aggression with force. Understanding that true peace requires strength, I accelerated internal development. I aim to restore the kingdom to its peak and beyond, to ensure I remain invincible against future shifts in power. Amidst my heavy workload, I received welcome news. Charlotte and our children had arrived from Carnford to join me in the capital. I set aside my duties to greet them at the city gates. Seeing Charlotte's carriage, the weight of my responsibilities finally lifted. Charlotte stepped down, visibly pregnant with our second child. Despite travel fatigue, her eyes shone with joy and relief at seeing her husband. I approached and gently took her hand, whispering, "The journey must have been difficult." Charlotte smiled, "Not at all. Seeing you sooner makes any distance worth it." Their eldest son, Klein, popped his head out, shouting, "Papa," and eager to jump down, his face flushed with excitement. I caught my son, lifting him high. Klein clung to my neck, nuzzling my cheek and murmuring, "Papa, I missed you." Overcome with warmth, I led my family toward our residence, a scene that drew smiles from the surrounding guards and citizens. I spent the day with my family, playing with Klein in the garden and sharing stories of the Northern Territory, savoring this rare time together. Charlotte updated me on Carnford. Edgar was managing civil affairs well, northern migration was steady, and Klein was learning to read. He's becoming just like you. Charlotte laughed. Stubborn, curious, and restless. I touched her belly, feeling the movement within, filled with anticipation for our next child. Do you hope for a boy or a girl? Charlotte asked. Either is fine, I replied sincerely. I will love them regardless. Charlotte leaned on me. I hope for a girl. One mischievous boy like Klein is enough for me to handle. I laughed and pulled her closer. That night, after Klein fell asleep, we sat by the window, watching the stars and enjoying the rare, peaceful silence. Is everything going well in the capital? Charlotte asked. I nodded. The Empress Dowager is dealt with, the princess is learning governance, and the new policy is progressing despite some resistance. Charlotte urged me not to overwork, noting I had lost weight. I squeezed her hand. Don't worry. You and the children are my greatest wealth. I will take care of myself for your sake. We sat in silence, savoring the warmth of our reunion. For me, with my family by my side, any place became a sanctuary. As the capital stabilized and the new policy took root, I shifted my focus toward long-term planning. I realized that a nation's strength requires a sustainable system that survives beyond any single leader. I assembled a team of scholars and officials to draft a comprehensive national code, integrating Carnford's governance experience with historical legal traditions. The advisory group debated intensely, and I listened, respecting their expertise while occasionally offering my own vision. I envisioned grand projects, canals for trade, roads for central control, schools for talent, and industrial growth. I knew these would take decades, but I was committed to the long-term vision. I was evolving from a conqueror into a statesman, aiming to leave behind a prosperous and civilized Plantagenet kingdom. Standing on the palace tower, I looked out over the city, my heart filled with confidence for the future. In mid-November, the first snow fell on the capital, Play City. The city turned white, and the atmosphere was serene. Children played in the streets while elders rejoiced, seeing the snow as a sign of a bountiful harvest. I watched the snow from my study, sipping tea. 2 months into the new policy, grain prices were falling, refugees were returning, and banditry was decreasing. Yet, I remained cautious. The Empress Dowager's remnants, resistant nobles, and border threats still loomed. Richter delivered a report. The eastern tribes, seeing the regime's stability, had paused their aggression and sent envoys to restore tribute. I scoffed. I knew they were merely testing me. True peace would only come through total assimilation, not appeasement. But for now, I had more pressing matters. The most difficult hurdle for the new policy was the state's crumbling finances. The Empress Dowager had left the treasury empty, with officials' salaries unpaid. Confiscated assets were insufficient to cover the nation's massive expenses. With tax cuts reducing immediate revenue, the financial pressure was immense. I convened a secret meeting with financial officials and 3 influential merchants. The attendees included Lucius, silk/spice, Marcus, finance/banking, and Augustus, iron mining. Their support was crucial for the regime's credibility. I was blunt. The treasury was empty, and without a solution, the government would soon be unable to pay its staff. Officials suggested tax hikes, but I refused, as I wouldn't burden the people or alienate the nobility. Lucius finally spoke. Lord Carl, I have a suggestion. I encouraged him to speak freely. Lucius suggested that while cutting costs was good, the government needed to open the source of revenue. Issue national bonds, Lucius proposed. I was intrigued. While common in southern city-states, it was a new concept for the Plantagenet kingdom. Lucius explained, the state borrows from the public, backed by its own credit, offering interest. It provides the state with immediate capital and investors with a secure return. I pondered the risks. National credit was fragile. If it failed, it would trigger a financial crisis. If I issue these bonds, how much would you subscribe to? I asked. Lucius held up 3 fingers. 30,000 gold coins, provided the interest is fair. The officials were stunned. This massive investment signaled strong merchant confidence in my rule. I thanked him, promising to develop a secure, formal plan before proceeding. After the meeting, I consulted Marcus on the technical details, denominations, interest, and fraud prevention, to ensure a robust regulatory framework. Marcus advised me that national debt is a double-edged sword. He proposed an initial issuance of 500,000 gold coins over 3 years at a 5% annual interest rate to raise funds without overextending the state. I tasked Marcus with drafting a detailed issuance plan for year-end. Alone in my study, I reflected that debt is merely a stopgap. True fiscal health requires long-term economic revitalization and tax reform. As the capital stabilized, a new issue emerged: Princess Irene's marriage. As the legitimate heir, Irene's marriage is a major political event. Her husband would become the future prince consort or regent, making the choice critical for the kingdom's future. Since her identity was revealed, suitors, nobles, and foreign royals have flooded my residence with gifts and promises, leaving my office overflowing with letters. Irene, raised in simplicity, detests these political machinations. She resents being treated as a bargaining chip and feels agitated whenever suitors are praised. One winter evening, Irene walked in the garden, finding solace in resilient plum blossoms blooming amidst the snow. I approached, my cloak dusted with snow from my return. I gently asked if she was troubled, offering her space to confide. Irene confessed, "Brother Carl, I don't want to marry." I sighed, asking if the suitors were the cause. Irene tearfully explained that they only desire her status and bloodline, finding their professions of love hollow and fake. I acknowledged that most suitors are indeed power seekers, a harsh reality of royal life. Irene asked if she was doomed to this fate, longing to choose her own partner. I admitted I couldn't promise total freedom due to the kingdom's interests, but insisted she wasn't without options. I promised to filter out the insincere and cruel, leaving the final choice to her. She could test relationships with suitable candidates, and if they failed, they would seek other solutions. Irene looked at me, surprised and grateful, asking if I truly wouldn't force her. I affirmed that she is a princess, not a commodity, and vowed to protect her right to choose her own life. Irene felt a renewed sense of hope, realizing she wasn't fighting alone and that a compromise between duty and happiness might exist. She whispered, "Thank you, Brother Carl." I urged her to return inside to avoid the cold. Irene walked toward the palace, glancing back with a faint smile before disappearing. I sighed, knowing the marriage issue would remain a complex challenge, but I resolved to shield her from becoming a political sacrifice. Amidst the capital's progress, news arrived. The Principality of Valtania had crossed the border and occupied a disputed Plantagenet village. The news shocked the court. Generals demanded retaliation, with Roland rushing to the capital to request command. Civil officials urged diplomacy, citing the kingdom's post-Civil War exhaustion, leading to a tense standoff. I summoned Richter, the Intelligence Bureau chief, for details. Richter reported that about 500 Valtanian troops occupied the village and built fortifications, suggesting a probe rather than a full-scale invasion. I asked about the villagers. Richter stated that the 200 families were detained but alive, those suffering from food and medicine shortages. I realized Valtania was testing my resolve. A weak response would invite further encroachment. An overreaction would allow Valtania to frame the kingdom as the aggressor. The situation was delicate. At an emergency meeting, the divide between the war-hungry generals and the fiscally cautious ministers remained unresolved. I ordered a formal diplomatic protest, demanding immediate withdrawal, release of villagers, and an official apology. A general asked what to do if they refused. I replied coldly that a refusal would mean war, and I would make them pay the price. I ordered the Southern Military District to prepare for combat and tasked intelligence with infiltrating Valtania to gauge their true strength and intent. My firm command silenced the room. Roland, though eager for battle, accepted the prudent strategy. A storm was brewing in the south, and I was ready. Amidst the crisis, I found solace in my family. My 2-year-old son, Klein, was full of curiosity, and I enjoyed teaching him about the world whenever I had time. Klein asked why I worked such long hours. I explained I was working to make the country better for everyone. Klein vowed to help when he grew up. I hugged him, promising to hand over the responsibilities one day. Klein teased that my stubble was prickly. They laughed and played together. Charlotte, in the final stage of pregnancy, walked with me in the garden, sharing her discomforts and feelings. Charlotte remarked that the baby was very active. I felt the movement, joking that the child might be a warrior like her. Charlotte insisted she wanted a quieter life for her child. I understood her desire for their child's safety, despite her own heroic past. Charlotte asked about names. I suggested William for a boy and Lillian for a girl. Charlotte agreed, pleased with the choices. After helping Charlotte to bed, I returned to my study to finish my paperwork. Despite the cold winter night, I felt warm, knowing my work was to protect the life I cherished. I continued writing, the sound of my pen blending with the falling snow. Half a month passed since the Valtanian occupation. Tension gripped the capital. Citizens worried about the threat of war, and public discourse shifted from curiosity to anxiety. I sent a stern diplomatic mission to the Valtanian capital, instructing the envoy to be firm but keep the door to negotiation open. The Valtanian duke's reply was disappointing. The duke refused to withdraw, claiming the village was historically Valtanian and accusing the kingdom of aggression for its border mobilization. The arrogant reply incensed the generals, with Leon demanding to lead a cavalry strike to reclaim the village. The war room erupted with calls for immediate retaliation. I remained calm, knowing the kingdom's fragile economy and post-war state made a full-scale war risky, especially with potential threats from eastern tribes. I decided to offer one final chance. I sent a second, high-level mission led by the veteran diplomat Viscount Leonard, proposing a ceasefire and territorial negotiations. Simultaneously, I ordered the southern military district to pull back 30 miles to show peaceful intent, while secretly preparing for war and intensifying intelligence gathering. I waited for Valtania's response, biding my time for the perfect moment. While border tensions simmered, the royal capital prepared for a major economic milestone, the issuance of the first national bond. After a month of planning, the Ministry of Finance and Marcus finalized the bond scheme, a total of 1 million gold coins, with denominations of 10, 50, 100, and 500. The bonds carry a 5% annual interest rate over a 3-year term, are freely tradable, and guarantee principal and interest upon maturity. To ensure credibility, I issued a decree prioritizing bond repayment over all other state expenditures. I also allocated state-owned suburban land as a sinking fund, sellable if fiscal issues arose. These measures significantly bolstered investor confidence. On the day of issuance, the newly renovated Golden Lily Kingdom Stock Exchange was packed. A temporary platform stood outside, where finance officials and prominent merchants prepared to preside over the ceremony. Crowds gathered before dawn. Merchants, nobles, and out-of-town investors braved the winter chill, their faces alight with anticipation as they discussed their investment strategies. When the doors opened, the crowd surged forward, waving gold and silver notes to purchase bonds. Staff worked frantically to register names, collect funds, and issue certificates. Merchant Lucius fulfilled his promise with a 300,000 gold purchase, followed by Marcus with 200,000. Mining magnate Augustus invested 100,000 as a show of support. Encouraged by these leaders, smaller investors, some contributing mere life savings of 10 gold, flocked to participate, signaling widespread trust in the new regime. By midday, the first batch of 500,000 golden bonds had sold out, far exceeding my expectations. The news electrified the capital. Skeptics were forced to reevaluate the Northern Lord's competence. My ability to launch such an innovative fiscal policy and receive market validation silenced critics, many of whom now clamored for the next issuance. The successful issuance eased my fiscal burden. I immediately paid out long overdue salaries to officials whose resentment vanished upon receiving their long-awaited wages. Other funds were directed toward repairing neglected water infrastructure. I dispatched engineers with materials and labor to reinforce riverbanks and dams before the flood season. Remaining funds provided winter relief for refugees. I established soup kitchens, shelters, and dispatched medical officers to provide care and prevent winter illnesses. These actions solidified my popularity. Though the commoners didn't understand fiscal theory, they recognized a leader who acted in their interest, with some elders even comparing me favorably to the late king. Beyond politics, Princess Irene underwent her own transformation. A conversation with me in the garden had forced her to confront her reality. She could not rely on my protection forever. As the heir to the Plantagenet kingdom, she had to learn to shoulder her own burdens. She made a shocking decision. She would learn swordsmanship. I was surprised when she informed me. Why the sudden interest, Your Highness? I asked. Irene replied firmly. You rose from the battlefield, and my father, Heinrich XI, was a valiant knight. I shouldn't just be a scholar. I must learn to protect myself and stand tall in crises. She added, even if I never use these skills, learning them will give me the courage to face challenges. Seeing my own past resolve in her eyes, I nodded. Very well. I will find you the best instructor. I summoned Hans Gruen, a retired cavalry officer and former chief instructor at Carnford, known for his skill and experience. Hans arrived in the capital immediately upon receiving my letter. Hans was a rugged, boisterous man with a prominent facial scar. He bluntly warned Irene, swordsmanship is grueling. If you're just looking for a hobby, quit now. If you're serious, I will teach you everything I know. Irene smiled at his directness and nodded solemnly. I am prepared for the hardship, teacher. Her daily schedule now included an hour of basic drills. She practiced stances, footwork, and strikes until her arms ached and she was breathless. She persisted, and her movements gradually became fluid and powerful. When she cut her finger during practice, she refused the servant's medical help, bandaging it herself before resuming her training. Injuries are part of the path, she said calmly. If I can't handle this, how can I learn? Watching from afar, I smiled with relief, knowing the once fragile girl was becoming strong enough to hold the kingdom's future. Hans was equally impressed, telling me privately, the princess has talent and grit. In a few years, she could be a true knight. I remained silent, valuing her newfound resilience far more than any martial prowess. One winter night, hurried footsteps echoed through my residence. Charlotte was in labor. I dropped my pen and rushed to the bedroom. Despite my battlefield experience, I felt a unique, overwhelming tension. Outside the door, midwives bustled with hot water and linens. Charlotte's muffled groans struck me like hammer blows. When I tried to enter, the midwife barred my way, citing tradition and superstition. I paced frantically, shouting through the door, Charlotte, I'm here. Don't be afraid. Charlotte's weak but firm voice replied, I'm fine, don't worry. Time stretched into an agonizing eternity. I trembled, recalling the birth of little Klein and wishing I could bear the pain for her. After hours of waiting, a loud, clear cry pierced the silence of the winter night. The sound was vibrant and full of life. I slumped with relief and shouted, Is everyone safe? The midwife emerged, beaming. Congratulations, Lord. Mother and daughter are both healthy. Overjoyed, I rushed into the room. Charlotte lay pale and exhausted, but smiling happily. She cradled a tiny, red-skinned infant with damp, light brown hair, who looked like a newborn kitten. I sat by the bed, gently stroking the baby's soft cheek. A warm current flowed through me. I took Charlotte's hand and whispered, You've worked so hard. Charlotte smiled. It was all worth it. She offered the baby to me. Do you want to hold her? I, a veteran of countless wars, felt clumsy and nervous. Guided by Charlotte, I gingerly took the infant into my arms. She was as light as a feather. I barely dared to breathe, overwhelmed by a tenderness I had never known. The baby stirred and let out a tiny, kitten-like sound. My heart melted. I kissed her forehead and looked at Charlotte, tears in my eyes. Thank you for giving me a complete family. They sat in silence, savoring the joy of the new life. The next day, congratulations poured in from Roland, Leon, and other generals. Even Princess Irene visited, holding the baby with maternal warmth. She's adorable, Irene whispered. What is her name? Charlotte and I exchanged looks. Lillian, I said. Lillian von Carnford. Irene nodded. Lillian, a beautiful name. She will surely grow up to be as strong and beautiful as her mother. Charlotte smiled. Thank you, Your Highness. Yet, as I celebrated, dark clouds gathered on the southern border. Intelligence reports indicated the Principality of Valtania was mobilizing over 20,000 troops, complete with catapults, battering rams, and scaling ladders, signaling a full-scale invasion. Simultaneously, eastern tribes, previously submissive, were acting suspiciously. Intelligence confirmed frequent, secretive meetings between Valtanian envoys and tribal leaders, suggesting a potential alliance. I realized I faced the crisis of a two-front war. I convened an emergency military council in the council hall, attended by Roland, Leon, Intelligence Chief Richter, and my key advisors. Richter briefed the council. Valtania has 20,000 troops, including the Black Bear infantry and frontier cavalry, plus laborers for siege engines. They will be ready by February. He added, the eastern tribes have likely signed a secret pact with Valtania, promised land in exchange for their cooperation. Roland warned, our 8,000 southern troops are too scattered to hold. We need reinforcements immediately. Leon countered, if we move our main force south, the east will revolt. We cannot afford to leave the capital exposed. Duke Schmidt suggested a south first, east second strategy. Strike Valtania decisively to neutralize the southern threat before turning to the tribes. I listened, studying the map, mentally simulating the battlefield. You all make valid points, I said, but you overlook the factor of time. I pointed to the Valtanian camps. They are mobilizing in winter to strike when the ice melts in spring. We have months to prepare. We will adopt a total readiness, focused defense strategy. The southern military district will reinforce its defenses, while Roland will lead a mobile reserve force drawn from the north and center, ready to deploy wherever the threat strikes first. I ordered Richter to intensify surveillance on Valtania and the eastern tribes, specifically demanding clarity on their secret agreements and true intentions. I instructed Leon to lead cavalry patrols and drills along the eastern border to project strength without provoking an overt conflict. The commanders departed to execute their orders. Roland and Leon discussed deployment details while walking, and Richter hurried to the Intelligence Bureau to mobilize his agents. Carnford's war machine accelerated into full operation. Alone in the council hall, I studied the map, acutely aware that the coming war would decide the fate of the Plantagenet kingdom and my own family. I opened the window, letting the cold winter wind sharpen my focus. I thought of my newborn daughter Lillian, my wife Charlotte, and young Klein, all of whom fueled my resolve. Clenching my fists, I vowed to protect my family and country, refusing to retreat a single step. As a storm gathered, I stood ready, convinced that my conviction and strength would overcome any obstacle. Spring arrived in Play City, melting snow and bringing new life, yet the atmosphere remained heavy with the impending war. The season of renewal stood in stark contrast to the escalating military tension. Valtania accelerated its mobilization, gathering 30,000 troops with secret support from an eastern duchy. With vanguard units advancing, an invasion was expected by mid-April. My defensive preparations were on track. Fortifications were reinforced, supplies were stocked, and 2 mobile legions under Roland and Leon were ready for deployment. I knew defense alone was insufficient. I needed a decisive blow to prevent a protracted war that would bankrupt the kingdom. I sought an opportunity to crush the Valtanian main force and eliminate the southern threat. That opportunity arrived on a mid-March night. A man claiming to be a Valtanian envoy requested an urgent, secret audience with me. Suspicious but intrigued, I ordered the man brought in after a thorough search. Stefan von Altenburg, a Valtanian scribe, appeared, claiming he had information vital to my survival. I calmly invited him to speak. Stefan revealed that Grand Duke Joseph planned to send assassins to kill me before the full-scale invasion. I remained composed, asking how Stefan knew of this. Stefan explained he was a disgraced noble seeking revenge against the Grand Duke's inner circle, having been forced into military service after his family was purged. He had overheard the assassination plot while recording minutes and fled to warn me. I questioned his motives, wondering if it was purely for revenge. Stefan admitted revenge was a factor, but he also wished to prevent an unjust war that would cause unnecessary suffering. Observing Stefan's steady gaze, I sensed the man was telling the truth. I accepted the information but demanded specific details regarding the assassins and their methods. Stefan identified the elite Shadowblade unit as the perpetrators and provided leads on their training base and communication methods. I promised Stefan protection and rewards if the intelligence proved accurate. The Intelligence Bureau verified the report, discovering Shadowblade activity and intercepting letters confirming the plot. 5 elite assassins planned to infiltrate the city as a caravan and strike my residence with the help of a corrupt local officer. I sneered, deciding to turn the trap against them. I kept the traitorous officer under surveillance to feed the assassins false information while preparing an ambush. 3 nights later, the 5 Shadowblade assassins arrived. They bypassed the guards using the traitor's route, moving silently toward the study. Upon entering, they were met not by a defenseless target, but by me and my personal guards, who had them covered with muskets. A volley of gunfire erupted. 4 assassins were killed instantly. The 5th was captured, his suicide poison pill seized before he could use it. I ordered the survivor kept alive to deliver a message to the Grand Duke. I told the captive to inform Joseph that I despised such cowardly tactics and challenged him to fight on the battlefield. The next day, I exposed the plot to the court, silencing the peace faction and unifying the kingdom for war. I officially declared war and launched a preemptive strike. Roland's mobile legion bypassed the border to destroy Valtanian logistics and supply depots. Simultaneously, Leon's cavalry wreaked havoc on enemy supply lines, causing widespread confusion. The Grand Duke was caught off guard by the speed and aggression of the Plantagenet response. Valtanian mobilization collapsed as their supplies burned, and their command structure faltered under the constant raids. Joseph's desperate, rushed counteroffensive was shattered against the well-prepared Plantagenet defenses. Within a month, the strategic initiative had shifted entirely to the Plantagenet kingdom. In mid-May, the 2 armies met for a decisive battle on the Freiburg Plain. I led 25,000 troops against Joseph's 30,000. The terrain of the Freiburg Plain offered both open ground for maneuvering and areas for ambushes. The battle raged from dawn until dusk. Artillery exchanges opened the day, followed by a massive infantry clash. I utilized the terrain to hide my reserves, baiting the Valtanians into a frontal assault. When the Valtanian left flank faltered, Joseph committed his reserves, leaving his center vulnerable. I immediately ordered Roland's heavy infantry to strike the exposed center. The heavy infantry smashed through the Valtanian lines, their armor and spears proving superior to the enemy's defenses. The Valtanian center collapsed, triggering a total rout across their entire formation. Joseph watched in horror as his army disintegrated, his attempts to rally them failing completely. As the sun set, I surveyed the battlefield, feeling the heavy weight of the cost of victory. Joseph escaped, but his army was destroyed, ending his ability to threaten the kingdom. The victory forced Valtania to sign a humiliating treaty, ceding territory and paying reparations, which eventually led to Joseph's downfall. In late June, I returned to Place City in triumph. The city celebrated wildly, with crowds lining the streets to cheer for me and the princess. Even my former detractors joined the applause, while elders wept, seeing the glory of Heinrich's era reborn in me. Riding a white warhorse, I maintained a calm smile. I felt relieved rather than triumphant, knowing the victory secured the Plantagenet kingdom from southern threats, allowing for internal development. Behind me, my soldiers marched with dusty uniforms and weary faces, their eyes burning with the pride of those who had defended the nation's dignity. Princess Irene waited at the palace gates, dressed in ceremonial robes and wearing a silver crown. She carried a decorative sword, a symbol of her own resolve and commitment to the kingdom. As I approached, Irene stepped forward and declared, "Welcome home, Lord Karl. The Plantagenet kingdom thanks you for your valor." I dismounted, performed a formal knight's salute, and replied, "It is my honor, Your Highness. Long live the Plantagenet kingdom." The assembled soldiers and citizens erupted in a unified roar. Long live the Plantagenet kingdom. Long live Lord Karl. Long live the princess. The cheers echoed beyond the capital's walls, signaling that the smoke of war had finally cleared. I dedicated myself to reconstruction, using war reparations and state bonds to fund massive infrastructure projects, schools, and industrial growth, ushering in an era of unprecedented prosperity. I initiated the North-South Canal project to link major waterways, facilitating the trade of timber, ore, and silk, while strengthening central control and cultural integration. I built 4 major highways radiating from the royal capital to key cities and fortresses, complete with tree-lined paths and relay stations to boost commerce and travel. Prioritizing education, I founded a national university and established public schools in every county, ensuring that the nation's future strength was built upon a foundation of widespread knowledge. Under my guidance, Princess Irene matured into a capable heir, Her kindness and diligence earned her the deep respect of the people as she actively participated in governance. Irene championed the rights of women and children, enacting laws against abuse and establishing a charitable foundation for orphans and the elderly, earning her the title the People's Princess. Charlotte and my daughter, Anna, grew quickly, inheriting her mother's spirit and my composure. She was the family's joy, often toddling into my study to be lifted high in my arms. Little Klein, now taller, trained in horsemanship and swordsmanship. Despite frequent bruises, he never cried, displaying a stubborn determination that reminded me of my own youth. On a summer evening, the family dined in the garden. The sunset painted the sky orange as the children played, their laughter filling the air while Charlotte watched with a satisfied smile. A long table was set with a feast of roasted pig, fresh fruit, and aged wine, a rare moment of leisure I had orchestrated to cherish my family. As Klein chased a butterfly and Anna observed a snail, Charlotte smiled at them and remarked, "Look how happy they are." I nodded, smiling. Indeed, these days are truly precious. Sipping my wine, I reflected on the years of bloodshed and hardship, realizing that every sacrifice had been worth this moment of peace. I remembered the winds of the Northern Territory and the smoke of the Freiburg Plain, silently vowing never to forget the fallen comrades whose sacrifices bought this prosperity. I set down my glass and took Charlotte's hand, finding comfort in her warmth. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. I smiled. "I was just thinking, I wish it could always be like this." Charlotte leaned her head on my shoulder in silence, while the flag bearing the golden sparrow fluttered in the evening breeze. Klein ran back, shouting, "Father! Mother! Look, I caught a butterfly." Anna ran over, squealing, "Brother, let me see." The children marveled at the blue and gold insect. When Klein suggested keeping it, Anna insisted they release it so it wouldn't miss its mother. Klein agreed, and they let it fly away. Charlotte and I exchanged a knowing smile, heartened by our children's growth and the nation's bright future. A new chapter for the Plantagenet kingdom unfolded in peace. The stories of those who fought for this land would become legends, sung by the wind through the ages.